Chapter 1. Chapter text. Chapter 1. Harry's arm was starting to ache. He had been in Olivander's shop trying wands for a while now. Every time he waved one, something weird would happen. Then Mr. Olivander would snatch the wand away while mumbling something to himself. Harry was getting a little worried about all the damage he was doing to the shop, yet strangely the more wands they tried, the more excited Mr. Olivander seemed to get. Bloody hell, awry. Most people darn take this long to find a wand. You must be destined for something special, Hagrid stated. At those words, Mr. Ollivander's eyes lit up, and he ran to the back of the store to collect a wand. I wonder. Yes, this could be just the one. Harley and Phoenix Tail Feather. Give it a try, Mr. Potter. Harry took the wand, and instantly this one felt different. He felt it connected with something inside him, and it felt warm in his hand. Excel, Mr. Ollivander started to say, but was cut off. Suddenly, Harry burst into flames. He didn't know how or why. All he knew was it was painless, and that despite the flames, nothing was burning. A few seconds later, the flames extinguished as quickly as they came, and Harry was standing there shocked and scared by the experience, while Hagrid and Ollivander just stared at him. Well, I have never seen a wand connect to its wizard that strongly before. But I think we can expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. For your wand to react like that, it must be a sign, Mr. Ollivander said, but Harry was only half listening as he stared at the wand in his hand. But it is most curious that you should get this wand, Mr. Potter. Most curious indeed, when it was its brother that gave you that scar, he said as he gently brushed Harry's fringe aside, revealing the only part of Harry's looks that Harry thought looked cool. The phoenix who donated the tail feather for your wand gave 2 feathers, just 2. One went into the wand you hold in your hand, the other to the wand that did so much damage. A sad look came over the man's face as he continued to speak. If I had known then what that wand was going out into the world to do, I never would have sold it. Harry was shocked by the revelation that his wand was related to the wand that killed his parents, but as he felt the connection to his wand, so new to him, but at the same time so right, he decided he didn't care. He was related to Aunt Petunia, and she was a bitch. You can't help who you are related to, but you can make a choice to be better. The thought echoed through his head. He had heard it somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. However, he always took solace in the thought that he didn't have to be like the Dursleys, and now his wand didn't need to be like its brother. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry arrived back at number 4 with his new magical books and equipment. He didn't know how, but somehow the Dursleys had gotten there first, considering Hagrid had taken their boat and left them in the old lighthouse with no way back to the shore. When Harry walked in, his uncle was angry, and when he saw Harry, he turned that anger on him. Boy, do you have any idea what you have done? Left on that goddamned rock with no boat to get back. Pound 5,000. 5,000 pounds that fucking asswipe charged me to get us back to shore. With that, he backhanded Harry, sending him backwards over his new luggage. Where am I supposed to get 5,000 pounds from? Harry didn't say anything. The fact that 5,000 pounds was also what Smeltings charged per term, meaning his uncle could easily afford it, was irrelevant to trying to avoid his uncle's rage. Seeing what his uncle was about to do, he curled up in a ball, and just as he expected, he felt the impact of his uncle's foot on his back. Harry screamed out in pain and tried to scramble away, only for the enraged man to catch his collar and throw him back to the floor. Unfortunately, young Harry didn't have the wisdom of experience to buy himself a wand holster or sleeves tight enough to tuck his wand up his arm, so he did what many of the other kids he had seen with sticks over the years did when they were pretending they were swords. He had tucked it into the waistband of his trousers. That would have been fine if Harry hadn't just landed on it. There was a sound of snapping wood, and for the second time that day Harry was engulfed in fire. Suddenly Harry burst into flames. He didn't know how or why. All he knew was it was painless, and that despite the flames, nothing was burning. A few seconds later, the flames extinguished as quickly as they came, and Harry was standing there shocked and scared by the experience, while Hagrid and Ollivander just stared at him. Harry looked around, wondering what had happened. Just a few moments ago, he had been back at Privet Drive, while his uncle had been in another of his rages. Well, I have never seen a wand connect to its wizard that strongly before, But I think we can expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. For your wand to react like that, it must be a sign, Mr. Ollivander said, but Harry was only half listening as he stared at the wand in his hand. It had broken, he had felt it, but now it was whole again, and he was back in Mr. Ollivander's shop. But it is most curious that you should get this wand, Mr. Potter. Most curious indeed, when it was its brother that gave you that scar, he said as he gently brushed Harry's fringe aside, revealing the only part of Harry's looks that Harry thought looked cool. But Harry's thoughts were more on how he had gotten back here had he time-traveled. The phoenix who donated the tell father for your wand gave 2 feathers, just 2. One went into the wand you hold in your hand, the other to the wand that did so much damage. A sad look came over the man's face as he continued to speak. If I had known then what that wand was going out into the world to do, I never would have sold it. Harry paid for his wand for the second time, with the same money as last time, and followed Hagrid out of the shop. The two went back to the leaky cauldron, and Hagrid prepared to go out into the Muggle world and arrange transport for Harry back to the Dursleys. Harry knew how that would turn out. Hagrid would arrange an expensive taxi, and Harry would have to face his uncle again. He had to do something. He looked around himself and saw that there was a sign with room prices on it. He did some quick maths in his head, and the cost to stay here for the last month of the summer was nothing compared to what he had seen in his vault. Mr. Hagrid, Harry started, but he was interrupted. It's just Hagrid. The giant of a man reminded him. Right, Hagrid. I can't go back to Privet Drive. Harry was nervous. If this didn't work, he knew what was waiting for him. You have to go back, awry. Where else would ye go? The big man was obviously trying to do what he thought was the right thing. Harry considered trying to tell him what his uncle was like, but he had tried that before and had the scars to remember the punishment Uncle Vernon had given him. But there is no one there. The Dursleys are halfway across the country, and it will take them some time to get back, Harry explained, hoping that the confusion that the man had with the London Underground was universal to all normal means of travel. I will just get a room here for a few days, until the Dursleys get home, and then go back. This was, of course, a lie. He wasn't going to go back there for the rest of the summer, but Hagrid didn't need to know that. Hagrid eventually agreed after a conversation with Tom, the toothless bartender, and Harry had a room booked, and Hagrid was gone. Harry made a second trip to Gringotts and withdrew enough gold to cover his room, breakfast, and evening meal from now until September 1st, and after paid a very happy Tom, who seemed equal parts happy to have a paying customer for a month, and happy that said customer was the boy who lived. Harry spent the summer eating 2 good-sized meals every day, reading through his new books on magic, and getting to know his new owl, which he decided to name Hedwig. December 25th, 1997, home of Bathilda Bagshot, Harry grabbed Hermione as he dove to the side, as the snake that had been an old woman only moments before tried to bite the who seemed to be the last person on earth that he could trust. Hermione's reflexes were brilliant, even as he pulled her out of harm's way. The amazing witch in his arms was casting a spell at the snake. Bombarda, the spell missed, but thanks to Harry, so had the snake. The only problem was a spell like Bombarda was not a good spell to use indoors, as the results tend towards bringing down the house, in a literal sense. Harry, Hermione, and the snake were suddenly buried in the rubble that had once been the home of one of Hermione's favorite authors. Harry and Hermione weren't trapped for long, though, as when Harry, who was still holding on to Hermione, tried to move, he heard a crack of wood from the wand that was still in his hand, and then the two of them were engulfed in flames and vanished for the 3rd time in Harry's life, at least from his point of view. He was standing in the middle of Ollivanders, engulfed in fire that did no damage and caused no pain. Only this time he wasn't alone. In his left arm with her arm around him was Hermione Granger, an 11-year-old Hermione Granger who, if Harry was right, hadn't met him yet. He was trying to figure out what to say, not only to Hermione, but to the 2 adults who were staring slack-jawed at the 2 of them. That was, until Hermione's brain caught up with her sudden change in reality. Harry, what's going on? Weren't we just? Hermione's words trailed off as she took in the sight of Harry in front of her. It wasn't the 17-year-old Harry that she had come to know, but the 11-year-old Harry that she would meet on the Hogwarts Express. Harry didn't know what to say. He wanted to reassure Hermione that he had experienced this once before, but also he didn't want to say anything to alert the adults. The first time this had happened, he had kept quiet because he was worried he would be thought of as crazy or sent back to the Dursleys. But now, with everything he had heard about the laws of time travel from Hermione after their little adventure at the end of their third year, and how with this new type of time travel Harry could change events, unlike what you can do with a time turner. He didn't want to be dragged off to an unspeakable lab where the best they could hope for was to be obliviated of the time travel and return to his relatives in the hope of preserving a timeline, or worse, magically dissected, so they could understand how to recreate the phenomenon. He was saved by Mr. Ollivander. Miss Granger, vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10¾ inches, a good wand for transfiguration. Mr. Ollivander, what's going on? How am I suddenly at Diagon Alley? I was just at home, then suddenly I was here, Hermione said, sounding confused. But while Hermione really was confused, Harry could also tell she was lying. For one, he had known her for years as one of his closest friends, and more recently his only friend, as he remembered Ron's betrayal, so he could tell when she was lying. For two, she had already called him Harry, and the Hermione of this time hadn't met him yet. I think it's my fault. I just got my wand and gave it a wave, and then there were all the weird flames, and you were suddenly here. I could feel something flowing from me into the wand. Harry hoped that he could convince them that it was just a strange case of accidental magic. Phoenixes could fire travel, after all. Ollivander looked at Harry critically, and Harry thought the old man was going to call him out, but instead he said something that pulled Harry's ass out of the fire. You know, I think Miss Granger was the last one to try and use that wand last week when she was here for her Muggle-born orientation. Phoenixes can travel by fire and take people with them, and Mr. Potter's wand has a phoenix feather at its core. It's possible that when Mr. Potter bound to the wand, there was enough energy for the residential magic of the feather to bring Miss Granger here. Harry let out a sigh of relief. We need to call Miss Granger's parents. If she suddenly disappeared from her house, then her parents must be worried. I think I saw a pay phone near the Muggle entrance to the leaky cauldron. He was just about to pull Hermione out of the shop and rush off to where he had remembered there was a pay phone, which he learned when he stayed in the alley for the first time after his first incident with his wand, when Mr. Ollivander cut him off. Mr. Potter, while your idea to contact Miss Granger's parents is indeed a good one, I need you to pay for your wand first. Harry handed the man a stack of 10 galleons before grabbing Hermione's hand and pulling her out of the shop. His plan was simple. If he overpaid, then Hagrid would probably stay to collect Harry's change. And if he didn't, then Harry would only be out a few galleons. He got lucky, as Hagrid stayed to collect the change, giving Harry a few precious minutes alone with Hermione. He pulled her along the alley at a run, ignoring her protests, and then through the leaky cauldron to Muggle London. Harry took Hermione to the phone booth that was about 150 FT from the pub, and as it was unoccupied, pulled her inside. Harry, will you stop this, please? Sorry, Hermione. I just needed to speak to you alone for a few moments, and this is all I could think of. Harry panted, a little winded. When Harry called her Hermione, she relaxed. So you are my Harry, then? The one I spent the last few months on the run with. Harry nodded, and Hermione threw arms around him and did the impersonation of a boa constrictor that is a Hermione hug. Hermione, need. Harry choked out, only half joking. She relaxed her hold, and Harry gulped down lungfuls of air. Harry, what happened, and why aren't you freaking out? How did we get here, and when are we? We need to know the exact date. Hermione didn't stop to take a breath between questions, and would have kept on if Harry hadn't cut her off. Harry smiled a little at Hermione. Maybe it had been the effect of having so close a call, but Hermione hadn't been this energetic for a while, and it was good to see his friend acting like herself again. I'm not freaking out because this has happened to me once before, not long after I got my wand the first time. I think it has something to do with my wand snapping, as that happened both times. Since we were squashed together, you came along as well. As for the date, it's the 31 of July 1991. My 11th birthday is the day I got my wand. Harry explained in a far more calm manner. Okay, what day of the week is it? She asked. Don't remember why. My parents might be at work. I need to know where to call. Hermione explained. They ended up having to ask a random passerby what day of the week it was, and the person told them it was a Wednesday while giving them a look that clearly meant she thought the children were being stupid. It was one of the days that her mother was home, so Hermione rang and found her mother frantically sobbing. Apparently, she had seen her daughter spontaneously combust a few minutes ago and was not exactly happy with the experience. She agreed to come to the leaky cauldron to collect Hermione. The two returned to the pub just as Hagrid was about to step out into the street to look for them. The three of them re-entered the pub, and Harry gave Hagrid the same spiel about the Dursleys not being there that he did last time. So Hagrid agreed that Harry could stay at the leaky cauldron until his aunt and uncle picked him up. Hermione, who knew about his relatives, said nothing. That Britain was small enough that you could get to any part of the mainland from any other part in a day and a half, if you were going to the ridiculous extreme of the North Scottish coast from the southern tip of Cornwall. And Harry was talking like it could take a week, didn't even raise an eyebrow from the bushy-haired girl. Harry and Hermione took turns going out to see if Mrs. Granger had arrived. Unfortunately, she turned up on Harry's turn, but he got to watch the two Granger women reunite and got to witness firsthand where Hermione got her squeeze them until they surrender style of hugs. And as much as the older woman was relieved to see her little girl alive and well, Hermione was also relieved to see her mother. Harry was then reminded that Hermione had altered her parents' memories and sent them to the other side of the world with new identities before joining him on his crusade. Something that was a long shot at fixing at best, and something that he knew Hermione regretted even if she believed it was necessary for them to be safe. At that moment, Harry vowed to himself that he was going to fix the future so that Hermione wouldn't have to give up her family again. He had a lot more information this time, and he had 4 years before Voldemort returned to find and destroy all the Horcruxes. He knew where 2 were, and had enough information to find a third. That left 3 to find, or 2 if Dumbledore had been right about the snake, as that wouldn't be a Horcrux yet. He would need Hermione's help to put together a plan, but he didn't think his best friend would take much convincing. He laughed internally at the idea of convincing Hermione. She was probably already working on a plan, wondering how to convince him. Once Mrs. Call me Emma. Granger had checked her daughter and discovered that she was perfectly healthy. She calmed down and ordered herself a stiff drink that Harry insisted on paying for 2 reasons. First, it was his fault that Hermione was here, and secondly, and far more convincingly, Emma didn't have any wizarding money on her. What gold they had was packed into Hermione's school trunk for her to take to school with her. Harry had gotten Hagrid to leave by stealthily reminding him that he had an important package for Dumbledore in his pocket. The half-giant, realizing that he was sitting in the pub with the Philosopher's Stone in his pocket, quickly made his excuses and left. With Hagrid the lovable oaf gone, Harry and Hermione were able to arrange to meet up a few times before they went to school on the first. As the Grangers lived in London, it wasn't far from their place to the leaky cauldron. Emma did ask about why he was staying in the pub rather than with his parents. However, when Harry told her that his parents were dead, and his relatives strongly agreed with King James in regards to how people should suffer not a witch to live, she had dropped the topic, though if the look she was giving him meant anything like the one her daughter used, he suspected that he hadn't heard the last from her. Chapter 2 Hogwarts. Chapter text Chapter 2 Harry and Hermione met up a few times after the two of them had been dropped in the past. Mr. and Mrs. Granger were very happy to help the two of them meet up every weekend, glad that Hermione would be going to school with a friend instead of having to face a completely new environment on her own. Of course, that Hermione would be somewhere new to her was a complete fiction. The two of them had their memories of 6 years of attending the school. Hermione, in one of the few moments of unsupervised time the two were able to get, had told Harry that she wished she could tell her parents about those 6 years. She had agreed she couldn't, because her parents would at least probably pull her from Hogwarts, if for nothing else because she wouldn't learn anything a second time around. They would probably think it would be more productive for her in a comprehensive school where she would learn things she didn't already know. Now it was the 1st of September, and Harry and Hermione had just left her parents on the Muggle side of the barrier. That was the entrance to platform 9¾ Mr. and Mrs. Granger had been kind enough to give Harry a ride to the station, and after a drawn-out, teary goodbye to her parents, Hermione pulled him through the barrier. The two of them smiled as they saw the bright scarlet steam engine, smoke blowing out of the chimney as it built up the heat and pressure that would carry them north. The two of them were some of the earliest to arrive, in part because Hermione liked to be early and in part because the two dentists had patients to see that afternoon and wanted the time to set up their treatment rooms for the day. They found a compartment near the front of the train and worked together to get their trunks into the top rack before collapsing into their seats. "We're finally alone. We need to talk." Hermione didn't waste any time jumping in. "Okay," Harry agreed. "What specifically do you want to talk about?" "Well, what are we going to do?" "You mean what's the plan going forward?" he asked, and she nodded, her bushy hair bouncing around her head as she did. "Well, we know where 3 of the Horcruxes are. The diary is with Malfoy, the locket is at number 12, and the ring is at the Gaunt Shack. And the snake isn't a Horcrux yet." Harry listed, counting them off on his fingers. "We think there is one at Hogwarts that just leaves one more to locate. I suggest we use the time between now and 4th year to collect what we can. If we can find and destroy them fast enough, who knows, maybe we can kill him before he returns and prevent the Second Blood War. Then Cedric, Mad-Eye, and so many more wouldn't have to die." Harry's eyes flicked up to Hedwig when he mentioned others. Hermione was nodding along as Harry spoke. "I agree, but we are going to need a plan." She pulled a pocket-sized notebook and a pencil from her coat pocket. She was just about to open it when she paused, a faraway look on her face. "Harry, what? What are we going to do about Ron?" she asked, Harry's jaw set hard. "He abandoned us, left us in the middle of a war. I don't know if I can ever get past that." He paused for a few seconds, considering his next words carefully. "I know how you felt about him. If you want to try again with him, I understand. Just don't expect me to be his friend again." "No, I think you're right. He went too far by leaving us. Maybe if he apologized, I could have gotten over it. But that can never happen now. This Ron cannot apologize for that one. Besides, he and I grew close because we were both your friends. I don't even think it's possible for us to get to a point where we like each other again without you there to ease the friction," she admitted. The two of them spent the trip plotting what they would do as they looked to take down Voldemort. Their plans were based around the next 4 years, getting more vague as time went, until by 4th year it was just a list of goals. They were interrupted 4 times during the trip. First by Ron Weasley asking to join them, but Harry refused, telling the redhead that he and Hermione were having a private conversation that needed to remain private. Ron had left looking annoyed and grumbling to himself. Second was a far more welcome Neville Longbottom looking for his toad. Harry sent him to find a prefect who could use a summoning charm. Third was the trolley lady, prompting Harry to buy a supply of his and Hermione's favorites. When Hermione had protested him buying so much sugar as it was bad for his teeth, Harry pointed out that he wasn't going to be able to visit Hogsmeade, so it was his last chance to stock up, probably until the summer. Hermione agreed with that and accepted a sugar quill when he offered her one. She may deny it, but the dentist's daughter loved sugar quills. The final interruption was Malfoy, when he introduced himself and his companions, and Harry and Hermione had introduced themselves in turn. Draco had spouted off about not knowing the name Granger, so she must be a mudblood, and that Harry could do better. Harry was just about to throw Malfoy from the carriage when Hermione spoke up, reminding them that Hector Dagworth Granger was the founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers. Hermione had then berated him for not knowing such a prominent wizarding figure. Once Malfoy had retreated with his security trolls disguised as students, he was convinced that Hermione was, at the very least, a half-blood. Harry and Hermione spent a few minutes laughing at Malfoy. The best part was Hermione hadn't lied once. She had told him that Granger was a wizarding name, and that he needed to be more knowledgeable about prominent wizarding fingers. That she sounded like someone defending an ancestor. She was proud of just made Malfoy jump to the wrong conclusion. Harry and Hermione enjoyed their trip across the lake, getting to see that specific view of the castle only for their second time. It was easy to understand why the first years were given this as their first view of the school. It was an inspiring sight. They were soon out of the boats, up to the castle, and waiting in an antechamber just off the entrance hall. The two of them stayed slightly off from the other students who were speculating on how they were to be sorted. The others just seemed so young. 6.5 years may not sound like a lot to an adult, but to a teenager, it was a lifetime filled with the development of your personality. Despite the appearance, compared to Harry and Hermione, these were children, and the two didn't feel quite at home with the group. They felt more like they should be babysitting them rather than be one of them. Eventually, they were led into the great hall and were treated to the exact same song that they remembered from their first year. The sorting started with Abbott, Hannah being first. Back on the train, Harry had worried about the sorting hat telling Dumbledore about their being from the future. Hermione had once again got on his case for not reading Hogwarts, a history. Honestly, Harry, would it be so difficult for you to just read the book? She shook her head in dismay again. There is a fascinating little charm in the book preventing you from finding a page until after you have been sorted into a house. That page is all about the history of the sorting and the sorting hat. There are charms on the hat preventing the hat from telling anyone a student's secrets. You could confess you intend to blow up the school and all of the teachers and students with it, and the hat couldn't tell anyone about it. His bushy-haired friend explained. That had seemed a little over the top to Harry, but he was glad of it now. Granger, Hermione. Professor McGonagall summoned Hermione up for her turn. After a full 3 minutes, with Hermione muttering quietly to herself as she talked with the hat shouted Gryffindor, and Hermione went to sit at the familiar table. More students were called up for their sorting, working through the alphabet, including Longbottom and Paddle. Then it was Harry's turn. The hat slipped over his head, covering his eyes, just like it did the first time all those years ago. Well, 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 another time-traveled soul. You are only the sixth I have had to sort. Now let's have a look at what I said last time. Slytherin, I can see why he said that, but I don't think you belong there anymore. You have spent so long in Gryffindor that it has trained the Slytherin side out of you. A pity that. Some cunning would have served your plan well. You could do well in Hufflepuff. You are loyal to your friends, and you don't shy away from hard work. Harry didn't like that idea. He had nothing against the Puffs, but it didn't seem right. Ah, but I can see it in your head you want to go with Miss Granger, and you would charge into the fires of hell for her. You did well in Gryffindor before, and you can do well there again. That got Harry thinking. Just how far would he go for Hermione? Well, he had already vowed to himself to change history itself so that she wouldn't lose her parents. One last thing before I send you on your way. This plan of yours, whatever happens, please keep that madman, the one using your defense against the dark arts professor as a show pony, from hurting my students. Harry sent a mental nod at the hat. He would do everything he could to prevent that. Then good luck in Gryffindor. Harry took off the hat, left it on the stool, and went and sat in the spot next to Hermione. They watched the rest of the sorting while quietly chatting away about nothing specific. As Harry's eyes wandered at the other students, his heart would skip a beat whenever his eyes passed over someone who had been hurt during the previous timeline. Katie, who had touched that cursed necklace. Justin and Penelope, who had been petrified by the basilisk. Neville, hurt in the Department of Mysteries. Victims of the Inquisitorial Squad. And of course, a smiling Cedric Diggory who was currently talking to Ernie Macmillan, helping the new first-year settle into his new house. Cedric had died right in front of him. It had been a needless waste, not because he was a threat, but because he was there and he wasn't needed. His was another life Harry was going to save. Soon, the sorting was over. Dumbledore had done his senile old man act, and then the tables filled with food. Harry and Hermione sat eating and chatting to the other first years, pretending that they didn't already know everyone already. When the main course had just dissolved into nothing, taking with it the remnants of Harry's steak and chips, and the table was suddenly filled with desserts, Harry felt it. After all his occlumency training with Snape, Harry never was able to shield his mind from being seen, but with the number of times the Death Eater had forced himself inside Harry's head with no more information on how to keep him out than shouting the word focus. At him when he failed, Harry had developed the skill to feel when someone was trying to poke around in his head. It had been Hermione who had come up with Harry's strategy to deal with this. It wasn't going to be fun. It would single him out amongst the students, but they couldn't let the fact that they were from the future be known. Harry grabbed his scar and started acting like he was in a lot of pain. He felt the pressure in his head drop, and he relaxed and acted like he was catching his breath. The whole school was looking at him, and whispers were spreading amongst them as Professor McGonagall and Madame Pomfrey descended from the staff table, the hospital matron casting diagnostic spells as soon as she got to him. "What's wrong with him, Poppy? Is he all right?" Concern was evident in the Scotswoman's voice. Surprisingly, Madame Pomfrey answered, and while she spoke quietly, they were still surrounded by Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs. So when she said, "There is a lot of dark magic in his scar. Something must have irritated it," enough people heard it that it spread like a wave in the Great Hall, giving two pieces of information. First, it told the students that Harry wasn't faking for attention. Many students from pureblood families had heard about dark magic-infected curse scars that acted up occasionally, and a curse from he who must not be named would probably leave a lot of dark magic behind. Second, and more importantly, it had told Dumbledore that it was probably his probe that triggered the pain Harry faked. He had expected to need to repeat his performance 3 or 4 times before Dumbledore reached that conclusion. Harry spent the night in the hospital wing while Madame Pomfrey tried to work out what had triggered the dark magic in his scar. But when morning came, and she hadn't found anything, and Harry was obviously in good health, though the Mediwitch had found some worrying signs of mistreatment that she would bring to the headmaster, but she never mentioned that to Harry. She let Harry go down to breakfast. Percy Weasley came over to Harry when he sat down and handed Harry his book bag with a few books in it. "Mr. Potter, I am Percy Weasley, one of the Gryffindor prefects. Here are your books. You haven't been shown the common room yet, and that would make finding your way there once Professor McGonagall hands out your timetable tricky. So I brought you what you would need for today from your trunk." Harry was surprised that Percy would do that for him, but maybe he shouldn't have been. Percy had always taken his prefect's status seriously. "Thank you, Mr. Weasley. How did you know what books I would need?" Harry asked, curious. The ginger prefect smiled. "They don't shuffle the schedules. Your first-year timetable is the same first-year timetable they used last year and the year before that, probably for the last few decades. As the classes don't change, there is no need to rework the timetables. The only work that needs doing is for older years when they choose their extra classes. I just looked at my old timetable. I will be coming to your last class to show you the way to the library, and once I have done that I'll show you where the common room is." Harry thanked Percy and began fixing himself a bacon and egg breakfast sandwich as Hermione sat down next to him. The first few weeks of term were easy and relaxing, apart from defense against the dark arts and potions, which were being taught by Voldemort and the murderer of Dumbledore. Even then, the classes themselves were easy. The only chore was spending so long in the company of the professors. More than once Harry and Hermione had to duck into a disused classroom after classes so that they could rant at each other as they wanted to curse the two dark wizards. They eventually settled into a routine, just waiting until they got their first opportunity to act. The only difference they made in those first weeks was in their flying lesson, where Harry had grabbed Neville off his broomstick before he was more than a handful of feet off the ground. The two of them had ended up in an undignified pile on the floor, but the only thing hurt was their pride. It meant that Draco never got his hands on Neville's Remembrall, and as such Harry wouldn't get a shot at the Gryffindor Quidditch team until next year, but Harry found he wasn't bothered by that much. Yes, he loved playing Quidditch with the team, but a year off of Wood's ridiculous idea of training times had its appeal. Their first major change came at Halloween. Most of the day had gone the same way. They were still learning the levitation charm in Flitwick's class, and Ron was still suffering from his case of having his head stuck up his ass. Hermione had far thicker skin this time, and had just called Ron a pathetic loser who stood about as much chance at passing his exams as the Chudley Cannons stood at winning the league. This had caused Ron's ears to go red, and for him to spend the rest of the day sulking. This meant that Hermione joined Harry in the Great Hall at dinner time, instead of spending it crying in a girl's bathroom. The two friends sat towards the back of the hall, close to the door and on the inside of the house table. It meant having their backs to most of the students, but that wasn't something they needed to worry about yet. They filled themselves on pork chops with baked apples, roasted nuts and pumpkin, and were about halfway done with the main course when the doors burst open. Troll. Troll in the dungeon. There's a troll in the dungeon. Thought you ought to know. And with that, Quirrell fainted. Now that Harry and Hermione were more experienced in the world, even if they couldn't exactly be called older, they could see just how much of an act that faint was. When people genuinely faint, they just drop. They don't shift as they fall to prevent the solid stone floor from leaving an imprint on their face. That's not to say the man was a bad actor. He put on a performance that had almost the entire school fooled for 9 months in the original timeline. But now Harry knew to look for the deception, and while everyone else was thinking about a troll wandering the castle, he watched and saw the man flinch. As soon as Professor Quirrell hit the floor, Harry enacted the first part of his plan. Faking concern, he ran to the professor, and just like he had seen on TV a lot of times, or at least that was his excuse, he checked the man's pulse. Immediately Quirrell started screaming as the flesh on his neck burned at Harry's touch. Harry jumped back, not having to fake the look of horror. He knew what he had done, but he didn't have to like it. The next few days were a storm of activity. Harry was questioned by Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Snape in the headmaster's office. Strangely, it was Professor Snape who helped him by confirming that touching someone's neck to check for a heartbeat was something that Muggles did when checking if someone was okay. Harry was still playing on dealing with the greaseball as soon as he could. Whether Azkaban or dead, he didn't exactly care which. Yet in the moment, Harry was a little grateful. Whatever happened to Quirrell was the big question that all the students were asking. Unfortunately, none of the teachers were talking. All anyone knew was that, after what happened in the Great Hall, Quirrell was taken to the hospital wing, and he wasn't seen again. Some wondered if Harry had killed him, although Harry didn't think he had. It had taken a lot more than that to kill the man the first time. Some thought that Quirrell was now in long-term care at St. Mungo's, with some of them believing it was Harry's fault, and some thinking it was just a coincidence that Harry touched him just as he started screaming. Some, and unknowingly the closest to the truth, thought that Harry had accidentally set off some dark magic the man had been experimenting with, and the man had been arrested after Madame Pomfrey had found it while trying to heal him. With all the gossip and whispering that everyone was doing about him, Harry wished he had his invisibility cloak again already, so he could avoid the gossiping hordes, but more importantly, so he could try and eavesdrop on the staff and discover what Quirrell's true fate was. Harry had little doubt the man was already dead, probably from Voldemort fleeing like the coward he is, rather than because of the burn Harry had given him. But until he and Hermione knew for sure, they couldn't be sure that any prediction they made for the future was remotely accurate. Quirrell was replaced by Wilbert Slinkard, who brought copies of the textbook that Harry and Hermione had grown to hate for the first years. Despite how much Harry hated the book because of Umbridge, he had to admit that Professor Slinkard was a decent professor, and his book was a decent introduction for first-year students who had a mostly theoretical class already. And not even Slinkard thought his book was appropriate for any students above first year. After Christmas, when Harry's cloak was returned to him with the same cryptic message as the first time, though this time Harry recognized Dumbledore's handwriting after he had grown familiar with it in his 6th year, Harry and Hermione began exploring the castle for a Horcrux. It was like trying to find a needle in a barn full of haystacks. It didn't help that they were mostly unable to check the place they thought most likely. The Chamber of Secrets, they had both decided, was off limits until they got their hands on the diary. They couldn't risk Lucius Malfoy changing his plans if he heard about the chamber being opened before he planted the diary on Ginny. Once they had that diary, they would be far freer to act. Harry had tried to eavesdrop on the teachers to what they were saying about Quirrell, but unfortunately, the staff gossip had moved on since then, though Harry did discover that Professor McGonagall had a bet with Professor Sprout about when he would ask Hermione out. McGonagall had 10 galleons on it, being the first Hogsmeade weekend of his 3rd year. The rest of the school year passed without incident. They were unable to locate anything that they thought could be a Horcrux, but they had checked all of the classrooms, both used and unused. The two of them passed their end-of-year exams easily, Hermione getting straight OS and the top spot, while Harry had mostly O's with a few E's and the overall second student of the year. They kind of expected it, given they were competing against people who were doing this for the first time. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Chapter text Chapter 3. Harry's summer kicked off to an amazing start. Hermione had gone behind his back and arranged for him to spend time with her family in London. Originally, Harry had planned on going with the Dursleys, then sliding out that night and returning to the Leaky Cauldron by way of the night bus. Hermione, though, had told her parents about this, and with the story that Harry's relatives were very religious and strongly agreed with King James on the matter of magical people, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Hearing this, and that Harry was planning on using some money he inherited to book a room at a magical B&B, Mr. and Mrs. Granger had arranged for him to spend the summer with them. Apparently, after Hermione had given the Dursleys her parents' phone number and her assurance that her parents were perfectly ordinary dentists who ran their own practice in London, Uncle Vernon had been willing to call the Grangers, who had then gotten permission to keep Harry for the summer. The drive back to the Granger home was a lot shorter than the one to Surrey Harry had previously experienced. But then again, if they wouldn't have had to carry their heavy school trunks, they wouldn't have even needed the car, as the Grangers only lived about 45 minutes away from King's Cross on foot. Living with the Grangers was like night and day compared to the Dursleys. For instance, the Dursleys barely ate anything if it wasn't deep-fried or drowning in butter, or sometimes even both. The Grangers, however, didn't even own a deep-fat fryer and ate a lot of healthier foods. The Grangers were warm and kind to people, whereas the Dursleys were always trying to keep up an image of being important and successful. It was by far the best summer he ever had, after the first week anyway, as Hermione had insisted that they get their homework out of the way first. For Harry especially, it was also a summer of opportunity. For the equivalent of about £2, the night bus could take them anywhere on the island of Great Britain. So, with the gold Harry had access to, the two travelled around the country while the elder Grangers were fixing teeth. They visited Godric's Hollow first, letting Harry visit his parents properly this time instead of skulking around and being interrupted by a snake in a Bathilda Bagshot suit. Hermione used some of her allowance to buy a few flowers from a local greengrocer, and they laid them on the grave. "Hey, Mum. Hey, Dad. Sorry I haven't been here before now." Or have I? I don't know how time works where you are. Maybe you saw everything that happened and how Hermione and I came back. This is Hermione, by the way. She is amazing. Some call her the smartest witch of our age. And she is, but I don't tend to call her that. Not because she doesn't deserve it, she does, but to me she is the most amazing person I have ever met. She has stood by me when any sane person would have run away screaming. If it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have survived as long as I have. Hermione, who had been standing there throughout his speech with a blush colouring her cheeks, beautied in. "Mr. and Mrs. Potter, don't listen to him. Harry is plenty amazing himself. I have stood by him, yes, and because I did, I have seen the stuff he has done. He truly is an amazing person, one I feel privileged to stand next to. You made a son to be proud of." That got Harry blushing, and he switched the subject, telling whatever remained of his parents the story of his life. They didn't just visit morbid reminders of the past, though. They also took the opportunity to visit more fun locations. The beach was a regular favorite, as apart from travel, it was a free day out, especially if they brought drinks and a packed lunch instead of buying lunch at an overpriced beachside shop. They did often find enough money to buy themselves an ice cream, though. They also made some plans for the coming year. First and most important was getting their hands on the diary. Once they had that, they would have a lot more room to move. Harry once again got a visit from Darby in the middle of the night, telling him it was too dangerous to return to Hogwarts. "Darby, I need you to answer me a question. I promise it is about elves in general, not about your master, okay?" Harry asked, and when the elf nodded, Harry continued. "If I told you something that wouldn't hurt your master, but would mean something that your master has planned would end up not working, would you or any elf be able to not tell your master about what you were told?" Darby looked thoughtful for a moment. "Darby is thinking he would have to tell, even if Darby is not wanting to," the little guy answered sadly. "Damn it. Look, Darby, I know you'll have trouble believing this, but it's safer for me at Hogwarts. I need you to understand that I know things that you don't. I promise you I won't die in school, no matter what plan your master has. I hope you are right, great Harry Potter, sir, but I am afraid for you." With that, the elf popped away. The next day, Harry told Hermione about the visit, and they started working out a way to free the elf. By the start of September, Harry could honestly say he had never had a better summer. They had gone to Diagon a few days ago, unfortunately once again arriving the same day as Lockhart's book signing. Harry picked up a Nimbus 2000 from Quality Quidditch Supplies. He considered getting the 2001, but he knew he didn't need it, and the 2000 was 100 galleons, approximately £500, to the 150 galleons, or £750, for the 2001. It just wasn't worth it. Of course, it didn't stop Harry from debating the choice for 45 minutes, causing Hermione to start muttering about boys under her breath, much to the amusement of her parents. Though Harry did get Hermione laughing not 20 minutes later when Gilderoy Lockhart tried to manhandle Harry into a photo opportunity, and Harry put the pompous git on his ass and started loudly saying how some stranger tried to grab him. Harry had to admit the sight of the overdressed peacock on the floor was pretty funny. A few of the people were surprised that Harry didn't know who Lockhart was, but the crowd was mostly on Harry's side when Harry pointed out that for all Harry knew, the strange man could have been a sympathizer of he, who must not be named, who was trying to grab the boy who lived. Lockhart was forced to give Harry an apology that unfortunately still ended up on the front page of the Prophet, but at least this time the headline was, "Lockhart tried to grab Harry Potter." A little sensational but true, and the story was a good retelling of the truth. Harry felt his heart stop when he saw Ginny with her family. He hadn't seen her the previous year, and she looked just like he remembered her from this time. Small and fiery, yet still shy, not the force of nature she would become in a few years. Though if he was successful, she may not become that woman he fell for. If everything went to plan, Ginny wouldn't be spending her summers living in hiding with a bunch of vigilantes. She wouldn't be conducting raids into the Ministry of Magic or fighting Death Eaters who had gotten into the school. She would never be his Ginny again. Harry watched her from a distance as Hermione hugged him while he mourned the loss of the girl she might have been, even if this was better for her. However, Hermione did have to hold Harry back when Malfoy Sr., Lord of the long flowing locks of shiny silver hair, got into a scuffle with Arthur Weasley as a cover to slip the diary into Ginny's new school supplies. September first arrived, and with it, the return to school. King's Cross and Platform 9, 3/4 were as chaotic as usual. The owls were squawking, the cats were meowing, and of course the Weasleys were late. Harry and Hermione spotted a few familiar faces, some happily, like Luna and Colin, others less fondly, like Rommel Devane. Harry got to see the sorting this time. He had been worried that Darby would try to seal the barrier again, but the way had remained clear. Soon, the headmaster was giving his start-of-the-year speeches and sending them off to bed. Harry passed Hermione one of the vials of potion they had prepared over the summer. Apparently the trace couldn't detect potions, and as they had their potion kits, there was quite a lot they could brew, though her mum had complained a couple of times when one of the things they were brewing filled the kitchen with a foul odor. Hermione slipped the vial into her robe's pocket and made her way up to her dorm room. Lavender, Parvati, Faye, and Lily were already there changing. "Hey guys, good summer?" Hermione asked. She hadn't been sitting close enough to them during the feast to gossip then. "Pretty good. I had to visit family in India for part of it, but that wasn't too bad," Parvati answered. "How was yours?" "It was good. Harry spent the summer at my place. We spent a bunch of time taking the night bus to the beach," Hermione admitted. Lavender jumped on that information immediately. "Your parents let you have your boyfriend over the whole summer." "My dad would flip if I asked for a boy to stay over." "Harry's not my boyfriend," Hermione protested. "Oh, please, the only people who don't think you are a couple are you and Harry. You're always together, you obviously care about each other. Sooner or later, the two of you will just have to wake up and realize it," Lavender teased, but in a good-natured way. "Harry doesn't see me like that," Hermione insisted, as she pulled her night clothes from her trunk. He liked pretty, sporty girls like Cho and Ginny. She knew this from the previous timeline, and that just wasn't her. "Harry doesn't see any of us like that yet. You know boys take longer to mature," Lily slipped into the conversation. Give him a few months, a year tops, and he will. I bet you'll be number one in his head, Hermione. That's true. Harry is the youngest in our year. You just need to be patient, Hermione, Lavender said as she slipped on her nightgown. Hermione gave up trying to convince them. They had made up their minds already, and only seeing Harry with someone else would convince them. She knew Harry didn't like her that way. She wasn't going to let herself be hurt again, hoping for more. She finished getting changed for the night, hanging her dressing gown by her bed, where she normally kept it in case she had to visit the ladies' room in the middle of the night. The castle was way too drafty not to have one. And she slipped the vial of potion into the pocket of her gown. Hermione then pulled out a book, unfortunately one of Lockhart's, but she needed to go over it again if she was going to tear it apart, and settled in bed to read. However, she wasn't just reading for the sake of it. She was waiting for her roommates to fall asleep. Eventually, at 1:45, she felt confident that she could slip out unnoticed. She pulled on her dressing gown and her fluffy slippers, and after pulling the curtains on her bed in case one of her roommates woke up to use the bathroom, she slipped out of the room. As quietly as she could, Hermione made her way down the spiral staircase until she reached the dorm for the first-year Gryffindor girls. She opened the door as silently as possible and slipped into the room. She took the potion vial from her pocket and opened it. Immediately, the potion started to give off a vapor that filled the room with a slight haze. She set the vial down, then slipped back out of the room to wait. The potion she was using was an illegal version of a sleeping draught. The vapors would put anyone who breathed in enough of them to sleep for between 4 to 6 hours. The potion was illegal not because of its effects, but because it was mostly used by people doing exactly what she was about to do, though she was doing it for a less selfish reason than most. After 5 minutes, she slipped into the room and checked on the first-year girls, and as assumed they were fast asleep. Hermione walked over to Ginny's bed, pocketing the now empty vial along the way. She pulled out Ginny's trunk, opened it, and started looking through it for Tom Riddle's diary. The problem was, it wasn't there. Hermione racked her brain trying to work out where the diary could be, then face-palmed for being so stupid. She slid her hand under Ginny's pillow and felt the warm softness of a leather-backed book. She pulled it out, and her eyes fell on the diary she remembered from so many problems ago. She pocketed the book and slipped out of the room. Instead of going up to her dorm, she went down to the common room and then up the boys' staircase. She and Harry had planned a lot over the summer and also discussed how things could go wrong. As only Gryffindor girls could have stolen the diary from Ginny, her and the other girls' dorms were the logical place to search if someone, either Ginny or a professor, were looking for the lost book. So she put the book in Harry's trunk, and they would hide it somewhere safe in the morning, somewhere no one would find it. The first thing Harry did when he woke up on the first day of term was check his trunk. He smiled to himself when he saw the little book on top of all his things. He quickly went through his morning routine and got dressed. He slipped the diary into his pocket, along with his invisibility cloak, and went down to the common room to look for Hermione. She was there, dozing on a sofa. She had been up half the night getting the diary, so that made sense. He gently woke her up and handed her a witch sharpening potion. They had brewed a whole bunch of simple potions over the break, and the witch sharpening was one of them. The effect was similar to a Muggle energy drink, only stronger and without the jittery essence you could get from caffeine. It also lasted about 8 hours, so it was perfect for a school or work day if you had little sleep. Harry had all the potions because he had the room in his trunk, as Hermione had filled her extra space with books she had picked up at Flourish and Blatz. Harry, a sleepy Hermione asked as he woke her. Yep, drink this. He handed the potion to her. She drank it down without even thinking about it, pulled a face at the taste, and Harry watched as her face went from sleepy and cute to wide awake in seconds. Good morning, Harry. Sleep well. Yep. He didn't return the question because he knew she hadn't. Instead, he said in a low voice, I see you had a productive night. She nodded. Do you have them? She asked, referring to the diary and the cloak. As we planned, he said as he nodded. The two of them left the common room, and as they walked, Harry slipped on his invisibility cloak. The cloak wasn't strictly necessary, but an overabundance of caution didn't hurt when dealing with Horcruxes. He could already feel it pulling at him to write in it. He wanted to taunt Tom, tell him how he knew the secret and how he was going to destroy the diary, but it was safer to get it out of his hands as soon as he could. They walked through the school until they arrived at the second-floor girls' toilets and slipped inside. Moaning Myrtle was floating around the room depressed as normal. Hermione started talking to her, trying to be nice, while using the room for its intended purpose. Her ultimate goal, however, was to provide a distraction so Harry could open the Chamber of Secrets and toss the diary in. Of course, despite how friendly Hermione tried to be, Myrtle took everything the wrong way and dove into one of the toilets. Harry ignored what Hermione was doing, and once Myrtle left, Harry opened the way behind the sink and threw the diary in before closing it again. Hermione came out of her stall, washed her hands, and she left the room as Harry followed. Once they were away from the toilets and in a corridor alone, Harry pulled off the cloak and stuffed it in his pocket. "Did everything go okay?" Hermione asked, seeing him appear. "Plan worked perfectly. The Horcrux is in the chamber, and no one who is not me is getting in there for the time being," Harry replied. The two conspirators made their way to breakfast, happy in a job well done. They were soon tucking into a full English breakfast, each deciding that they had earned the less than healthy breakfast. Harry sat in the back of the defense against the dark arts class, trying not to burst out laughing. Hermione had raised her hand at the start of the lesson and started asking questions about his books, and Lockhart was getting more and more flustered as she went on. "In your book year with the Yeti, you say you spent the time between October of 1984 and August of 1985 in the Tibetan mountains with the Yeti, correct?" "Quite right, Miss Granger, sir." "If you were in Tibet with the Yeti, how come in your book Holiday with Hags you claim to have been kidnapped by the Hags in February of 85? The Hag Coven was in Ireland. You can't have been in both Ireland and Tibet at the same time." "Ah, my editor must have made a mistake with the dates. Thank you for bringing it to my attention, Miss Granger. 5 points to Gryffindor." The pompous man was about to turn to the whole class when Hermione continued. "Well, you should probably find a new editor, because they made the same mistake with Travels with Trolls, Voyages with Vampires, and Marauding with Monsters. In the chapter you dealt with the Japanese Kappa gang who were emulating the Yakuza." Hermione went on pointing out the inconsistencies, finishing up with pointing out that in his 8 years of adventures, he had apparently had 102 months of stuff to write about. Lockhart, after much spluttering, managed to get his class back on track and issue the test he had given the first time Harry had suffered through the class, and Harry had prepared his answers. One, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? Silver, but only if it's shiny enough that he can stare at his own reflection too. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? To be more famous than Merlin III. What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date? Convincing the world he has enough talent to do any of the stuff he claims in his books for. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite animal? Unicorns, because he needs powered unicorn tail hair to make the hair potion he used. 5. How many times did Gilderoy Lockhart win which weekly's Most Charming Smile award? It doesn't matter. All of the awards should be removed, as he uses potions to achieve the smile. 6. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's shoe size? Size 6, but he uses charms to stick size 10 shoes to his feet, so no one will realize how small certain body parts of his are. 7. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite type of quill? One that can do the writing for him, as he is lazy. 8. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite book? His photo album of himself. 9. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite author himself? Gilderoy Lockhart hasn't bothered to read anything written by someone else. Harry went on, filling out every question with a similar answer. By the time he was done, he was having trouble keeping from laughing. 50. When is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday, and what would be his ideal gift? If the professor needs us to remind him when his birthday is, maybe teaching isn't a career for him. As for a gift, he would love a poor sap to tell him of something they did so Lockhart can wipe their memories and claim he did it in his next book. He sat back and waited for the other students to finish their tests. He Gemina'd a copy of the test to show Hermione later and slipped the copy into his book bag. Hermione had also finished, and she was looking at him confused at why he would make a copy of the test, but as there were still students taking the test, she couldn't ask him what he was doing. After almost 10 minutes, Lockhart had them all put down their quills and pass their tests forward. He started to go through the tests, commenting, "Well, looks like you didn't read my books closely enough. Almost none of you got more than a handful of ques." He trailed off, reading what Harry assumed to be his test. He looked a little flustered as he stared at the answers on the sheet. Was all Lockhart said as his brain rebooted before he finally settled on a course of action. "Mr. Potter, can you please remain after class?" "Yes, sir." The rest of the class passed smoothly, though that was more to do with Hermione, who immobilized the Cornish pixies before they had even left their cage, preventing the chaos that had been the defining characteristic of their first lesson. When class ended and everyone left to get to their break, Harry packed up his bag but didn't leave. Knowing how free his professor was with memory charms, Harry kept his wand on his desk, but where he could grab it quickly. "Harry, I want to talk to you about your test answers," Lockhart said as he stood posing by his desk, trying to look impressive. "What about my answers?" Harry looked right at the man unflinchingly. "Look, Harry, I like a good joke as much as anyone, but don't you think you went too far?" Harry smiled at that. He couldn't help himself. "But the whole test was a joke, wasn't it, sir? I mean, this is defense against the dark arts, right? What dark arts can be countered by knowing your favorite color or when your birthday is?" Lockhart sputtered at that, but Harry pretended not to notice. "Although, if you really feel I went too far, we can take the test to Professor McGonagall. I'm sure she will know what to do as soon as she sees it," Harry pushed, knowing that with Lockhart's age, McGonagall would have been his teacher when he was at Hogwarts, and Harry was betting that the pompous peacock didn't want her to see the self-centered test he had given out. "I don't think there will be a need for that this time. Just take this more seriously next time, Mr. Potter." He tried to cover how nervous he was by being magnanimous, but the quiver in his voice was a dead giveaway. Maybe this time the moron would focus on teaching. Harry slipped out of the classroom to find Hermione waiting for him, a slightly worried look on her face. "What was that about, Harry?" she asked. Harry pulled his copy of the test out and handed it to her. Hermione's eyes quickly scanned his answers, at first smirking, but getting more worried as she read on. "What were you thinking, Harry?" She finally hissed at him angrily as she slapped the test back into his hands. "That the pants needs bringing down a peg or 200. Harry replied, not understanding why Hermione was so angry. "And what if he had managed to obliviate you like he did to himself last time? What would happen then? Where would that leave me? The only person who knows what's coming, me needing to find a way to stop Voldemort myself, me alone with no one who I can talk to. You need to be more careful, or everything we are doing is going to be destroyed before we even really start," Hermione lectured. Harry now felt bad. Hermione was right. Even if Harry was positive he could win against Lockhart, there was always the chance Lockhart could get lucky. He could have left Hermione with this burden, and for what? So he could score some cheap points against someone who doesn't even matter. "Hermione, I'm sorry. I didn't think about it that way. I was just trying to score some cheap points against the man after what he tried to do to me, he almost said, and ran, but that was a sure way to get Hermione more angry. She was still holding a grudge against the redhead for leaving them. "Let's just leave it, Harry. I don't want to fight over this. Let's just go and plan what we are going to do next." Hermione relaxed and leaned into him. It wasn't one of her bone-crushing hugs, but she obviously needed to be close to him for a little while, so Harry put his arm around her. Quidditch tryouts were the third week of term, and when Harry turned up with a Nimbus 2000 and showed off his skill at catching the snitch Oliver would practically begged Harry to join the team. He decided to do so. Quidditch was a good distraction from everything that was going on in his life. However, it didn't stop Hermione from lecturing him for taking time out of searching the castle for whatever Horcrux was hidden here. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Chapter text, Chapter 4. Now that they had secured the first of the Horcruxes, Harry and Hermione had room to move. Their first order of business was Wormtail. Until Sirius was out of Azkaban, there was no way they could get into number 12 Grimmauld Place. They had debated a long time on what was the best way to get Sirius out, and the only workable option they could come up with was to use the rat to get him a trial. Capturing the rat had been laughably easy. The Death Eater hadn't expected a thing from the boy he had helped arrange a murder attempt of. So Harry, who was still proficient at silent casting, had stunned the rat, as he and the red-haired menace had slept in the bed next to his. Harry had then stuffed the rat into an unbreakable cage that Hermione had peppered. While Harry was doing this, Hermione had the harder job. They needed a way to say they knew that the rat was an animagus, and the only thing that could do that was the Marauder's map. But there was no way the twins would be ready to part with it. Last time, it had taken Harry saving their sister from the Chamber of Secrets to make the two feel they owed Harry enough to part with it. And Harry and Hermione were unwilling to put her through anything like that again. Ginny and Harry would never again have what they had, but that didn't mean Harry didn't care. So Hermione slipped into the twins' dorm room under Harry's invisibility cloak, with a bunch of silencing and non-detection charms applied to herself just in case. She tried the summoning charm first, but nothing seemed to happen, which meant it was probably in one of the trunks. Hermione, knowing the twins, cast a silencing charm on the first trunk before she opened it. That was apparently a good call, as a bunch of stuff that looked loud started moving as soon as she opened the trunk. She tried her summoning charm again and got lucky. The map came sliding out of the copy of the standard book of spells, grade 4, that this twin was using. Hermione slipped a letter that Harry had penned, apologizing for taking the map the way they had, that he had signed the Son of Prongs. They hoped that that would take the sting out of losing the map for the two. She closed up the trunk and slipped out of the dorm. The Weasleys had all gone nuts over their missing things. Harry didn't know which of them had gone through his trunk and every other student in the tower's trunk, but given that the girls had been hit as well, he suspected Ginny. Ron was searching high and low for his rat, and the twins were grumpy. Given that Ginny had done the same thing in the old timeline, Harry and Hermione had not stored any of the items in the dorm. Harry kept the map on himself at all times, but in a pocket he had spelled to make anything inside it resistant to summoning charms. Wormtail was put in an old hidden room that was out of the way. Hermione had taken great delight in informing the animagus that there was nothing stopping him from turning back into a human if he chose to. But as the cage was unbreakable, and he wasn't, the result would be messy. That Halloween was the first that Harry could remember that went well for him. Instead of the Chamber of Secrets being opened, Harry was visited by a few people from the Ministry. Harry had written to the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, and had asked the man to come speak with him on that day. A similar letter had made its way to the head of the DMLE. Minister Fudge was as predictable as he was self-centered. A meeting with the boy who lived could do him a lot of good with the public. Of course, for him to get public support, the public had to know about it. That was why he had brought the witch, who was clearly losing the fight with middle age. Even if the green robes she was wearing were any indication, she refused to acknowledge it. Harry heard Hermione whisper the phrase, "mutton dressed as lamb," under her breath as Rita Skeeter walked in, and he had to fight not to burst out giggling. Both the minister and Director Bones were surprised by the other being there, having arrived separately. Professor McGonagall was there, because when Harry had asked if it was okay for him to ask the two to the castle, she had reluctantly agreed on the condition that she was there to act as a responsible adult on their behalf. Harry had done some quick talking, and everyone stayed. Madam Bones had tried to send Skeeter away, but Minister Fudge wanted her to stay. Eventually, they got around to asking why Harry had called the meeting. "Well, you see, it's a little complicated," Harry started, as he found that he didn't need to act nervous as much as he thought he would. The nervousness was all too real when he considered what was at stake. "I have very few memories of my parents, and what I do have is mostly just flashes. But I do have some memories of that night, just fragments. A flash of green light, my mother hugging me while she cried and told me she loves me as the sound of feet coming up the stairs echoed in the background, and my father saying, 'Run, he is here, Pettigrew betrayed us.' The last of the three was only half true. He had no real memories of his father accusing Wormtail, but the rest was true. Harry remembered hearing somewhere that the best lies had a lot of truth in them. As he spoke, Rita was scribbling away with her quill. Harry was surprised it was a regular quill and not the acid green quick quotes quill. Maybe Skeeter didn't think she could get away with it in front of the director of the DMLE. Of course, I don't know who Pettigrew is, but I did come across that name again. My father was a prankster at school. He and his friends called themselves the Marauders, and they made this." He pulled out the map and tapped it with his wand. solemnly swear I am up to no good. The map revealed itself to the astonishment of the adults. As you can see on the map, it shows the location of each person in the castle. Look, here we are. He pointed to the room and started reading the names on the map. Minerva McGonagall, Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Margarita Skeeter, Harry James Potter, Hermione Jean Granger, and lastly Peter Pettigrew. There was a gap from the assembled adults. That's impossible. The man is dead, killed by Sirius Black. The map must be faulty with age, Fudge started out. That's what I thought at first, Hermione said, that the map was broken. But then I noticed that the Peter Pettigrew name was nearly always following one person, Ronald Weasley. Harry took over. But I'm a roommate of Weasley's, and we share classes and everything, and there was no one following him anywhere. However, a few nights ago I was watching the map, and Weasley got up to use the bathroom, but the Peter Pettigrew marker stayed in his bed. I looked, and the only thing in his bed was his pet rat. Hermione took over again, sticking to the story they had concocted. Harry told me about what happened, and I thought about Professor McGonagall's first lesson. She started the lesson showing us that she could become a cat. And I thought, if Professor McGonagall could transform into a cat, maybe someone else could turn into a rat. Tested it out by catching the rat and walking around the castle with it to see if the name on the map followed it, and it did. Harry finished up, with the adults looking at him, stunned. He pulled the cage with Wormtail out of his school bag and set it on the desk in front of him. I know that it might be nothing, it might be just a coincidence, or the map may be malfunctioning, but given what I remember my dad saying, I need to know, please. Harry asked, as only someone with the appearance of a child could. Amelia Bones looked at the rat with a calculating expression, as if she was weighing up the possibility of this being someone who everyone believed was dead. Given her job, she was probably trying to work out what crimes she could charge the man with if it was true. Rita was scratching away with her quill, her expression almost hungry. Knowing her, she was hoping that the rat was a hidden animagus. After all, that would be a much bigger story. McGonagall looked conflicted. Harry understood that, from her point of view, Pettigrew was a hero who had tried to avenge the deaths of some of her favorite students, a true Gryffindor that gave his life to stop a madman. Everything that she was hearing was an assault on that world view. Fudge looked as calculating as Director Bones, though he was spending almost as much time looking at Skeeter as he was looking at the rat. He was a politician, looking for the best angle for himself. He probably thought that it was a war orphan with a broken toy and a bit of paranoia, albeit a famous war orphan who could earn him some good fluffy press stories. For once, both Director Bones and Minister Fudge were in agreement for what was to happen. Okay, Director Bones, I think this is just the enchantments running out on an old map, but it should be easy enough to prove. Why don't you perform the charm to return an animagus to their human form, and we can clear this up without delay? The head of law enforcement for the magical community smiled a little at not having to fight with the self-serving oaf that currently held the title of minister. She slipped the tip of her wand through the bars of the cage and stunned the rat before removing it from its cage and setting it on the floor and started to cast the spell. There, you see, it's just a norm, bloody hell, he really is an animagus. But. Harry and Hermione watched from one of the classroom windows as the man was taken out of the school by 3 auras, one holding each arm and the third walking behind at about 6 feet, wand out and ready if the man tried to escape. Director Bones had called them almost as soon as the rat was turned back into his human form. She had only delayed long enough to shoot a stunner, a full body bind, and an incarcerus at the unconscious pile of human garbage that had just been revealed. The minister was flipping between wanting to throw the book at Pettigrew and believing the whole thing was somehow staged. But it was Skeeter who did exactly what Harry had hoped she would and set the minister straight, though admittedly Harry had expected it to be via new articles forcing his hand rather than collaboration on what article she would write. So, Minister, what headline sounds better to you? DMLE, Minister of Magic, and Harry Potter work together to capture hidden Death Eater. A little wordy, I admit, or maybe Death Eater taken down would be better and use the first one as a subheading. The words had calmed the minister quickly, causing Director Bones to roll her eyes. Minister, perhaps we should be seen to be quick and decisive in this. Unless you have an objection, I'll open a full investigation into this. She nudged the unconscious man with her foot. I'm already considering what to charge him with. Being a Death Eater, of course. Fudge insisted. Bones sighed. That's a political charge, Minister, not a legal one. It's not illegal to be a Death Eater. However, I doubt the Weasleys knew about this, so trespass, voyeurism, theft, and tax fraud. Tax fraud? Harry asked. If you're pretending to be dead, you're obviously not paying your taxes, but you still owe them on what you earned between the last time you paid tax and when you faked your death. Madam Bones had explained. Harry went back to watching the group of people leaving the castle. Apparently, the DMLE preferred to portkey prisoners rather than use the flue, as it was possible to leave the flue network by the wrong exit. Fudge didn't have that problem, though, and had left via flue. The disadvantage of having people leave in two groups became obvious less than a minute later, when a Beetle Harry and Hermione both recognized flew up and landed on the windowsill the two teens were currently looking out of. The DMLE must have thought Rita left with the minister, while the minister thought she was following the DMLE. Hermione gave Harry a significant look before saying, "You want to head down to the feast, Harry?" Harry shook his head. "Not really." Then an idea struck Harry. If Skeeter was going to spy on him, then he would use it to tell her exactly what he wanted her to hear. I wonder if Director Bones will look at the case of the man who was convinced of killing Pettigrew again. Hermione instantly caught on to what Harry was doing. Well, she should. If his victim is still alive, he obviously didn't commit murder, and if the investigation got that wrong, then the whole investigation needs going over to see what evidence was missed. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, a lemon-flavored sweet rolling around his mouth as he considered the case of Mr. Potter. Obviously, the boy still had his mother's protection. The incident with Quirrell was enough to prove that. The elderly man shuddered at the memories of what had happened to the posed professor at the boy's touch. Yet, it was also just as obvious that the boy still had the shard of Tom's soul in him as well. His reaction to legilimency was enough to work that out. Obviously, Tom's shard didn't want to risk being discovered by a probe. Did that mean that the shard was connected to the boy's mind and was influencing him? The old man didn't think so. Mr. Potter spent all his time in the company of the Muggle-born girl. No way Tom would allow that if he had any say in it. But the boy was brilliant. He and the Granger girl were top of the class, and both Flitwick and McGonagall had mentioned that the two didn't appear to be pushing themselves. Maybe the boy could defeat Tom. He definitely had the brilliance to handle the feat. But to do that, he would need to find a way to rid himself of the foul shard. A feat that has never been accomplished without the destruction of the container. Yet the transfer ritual was never completed, and Mr. Potter wasn't a prepared vessel to hold a soul fragment. There was still hope that the shard's hold on Mr. Potter wasn't as strong as in most Horcruxes. And what of their discovery of Pettigrew? He never expected for someone like that to be hidden right underneath his, admittedly crooked, nose. This will definitely take a lot of pondering to work out the best way forward. He slipped another lemon drop in his mouth and made a mental note to buy some more. The investigation into Pettigrew and the articles in the Prophet were enough to get Sirius Black a trial, and as the man volunteered to be questioned under Veritasrum, there was plenty of evidence to get him released and Pettigrew thrown in prison. Sirius was awarded 66,000 galleons for being unlawfully imprisoned for 11 years, though it was just the money he would have made himself if he had been working for that time. 6,000 gallons a year, or almost £30,000. Harry went home for Christmas to meet him, and had slipped a basilisk fang that he had gotten from the basilisk in exchange for a buck Harry had stunned in the forest, to creature so that the elf could destroy the locket. As London was both where Grimmauld Place was and where the Grangers lived, Harry and Hermione spent a lot of their break visiting each other. Mostly, Harry went to the Grangers, as it was an escape from the dungeon that was Grimmauld Place. Sirius was working at making the place into a livable home, but it was slow going. In part because the house had been neglected for so long that it was in a terrible state, but also because Sirius was still more focused on healing himself. But Sirius thought that the house should be livable by the time Hogwarts sent the students home for the summer. Harry thought Sirius was being a little optimistic, but he didn't say anything to his godfather. When he was at Grimmauld, Harry spent most of his time talking with Sirius about his parents. Harry had a few stories repeated from the previous timeline, but he had many more times that in new stories. He had never really had the time to just sit and talk with Sirius. Man was on the run during his 4th year, and in his 5th, Marley Weasley was jealous that Harry was turning to someone other than her to be a parent. Coupled with a paranoia that Sirius might inform Harry of anything to do with the war without Dumbledore's approval, this had led to the woman keeping them apart as much as she could. Sirius went a little nuts at Christmas. First, he bought Harry and Hermione a high-end Muggle Road bike each, so that it would be easier for the two of them to visit each other. But he went all out getting Harry everything he could think of. Harry now owned a deluxe chess set, a set of garbstones, exploding snap cards, a wand holster, a new wardrobe, both Muggle and wizarding, new Seeker's gloves, and an expanded 5-compartment chest to replace his school trunk. Harry returned to Hogwarts, and the rest of the year passed without incident. He made a few trips to the Chamber of Secrets to see if the Horcrux was hidden there. It wasn't, but Harry did find a hidden cache of books that included one with instructions on how to create a Horcrux. However, Harry and Hermione already knew the information in it from the books Hermione had stolen from Dumbledore's office after he had died. Harry surprisingly developed a sort of friendship with the basilisk. Turned out, actually feeding her and talking to her so she wasn't completely bored was enough to get her to be friendly. She gave Harry some stories about Salazar. She exclusively used Slytherin's first name. And Harry half wished he could share some of the stories to the Slytherin purebloods, as some of the ideas they had about the man were completely wrong. For example, of the 4 Hogwarts founders, Salazar was the one who was considered the soft touch by the students. And as the one who loved animals, his lessons were a cross between care of magical creatures and the type of defense against the dark arts that Harry had experienced in his 3rd year with Lupin, when the teacher had focused on defending yourself from dark creatures. According to the basilisk, Salazar even advocated for better rights for goblins and centaurs. Without any petrification or rogue bludgers to interfere, Quidditch had gone off without a problem, with Harry catching the snitch in all of Gryffindor's games that year. Harry got a good laugh at Malfoy as he threw a fit at being beaten by a half-blood on an inferior broom. Wood was singing Harry's phrases for a week after Harry caught the snitch in their final match against Hufflepuff, winning Gryffindor the cup. On the last day before they left for the summer, 2 things of note happened. First, the curse of the defense against the dark arts professor struck again when 2 irate parents came storming into the great hall at breakfast, screaming at the self-absorbed moron for getting their daughter, a 7th-year Hufflepuff, pregnant. That another girl, this time a Gryffindor, had then spilled a jug of milk on the teacher's table to empty its contents over Lockhart while screaming at him for cheating on her was how everyone learned that the man had been sleeping with a number of 6th and 7th-year girls, 2 of which were pregnant. This, of course, meant that Dumbledore had needed to fire the man on the spot. The only thing keeping it from being worse was that each of the witches were of age. The second thing was that Harry met, or rather re-met, Luna Lovegood. Harry bumped into her as she was searching the castle for her possessions, and Harry offered to help her look. They were just finishing with the 3rd floor, where Harry's ability to use a summoning charm had helped in retrieving a copy of the Quibbler, a left shoe, a family photo, and much to Harry's embarrassment, a pair of knickers, when Luna spoke up. "How far did you come back, Harry?" Her tone was light and dreamy as always, but her words chilled him. What do you mean? How far from where?" Harry tried to act calm, but the slight stutter in his voice was a dead giveaway. "I suppose the language is confusing. It should be how long did you come back, but that sounds like you could go back to when you came from. What I want to know is what was the date you left the future, and what was the date you came back to?" Harry stared at Luna with his mouth hanging open. "How did you know?" She smiled at him. "I asked first." Harry sighed, knowing that Luna can be stubborn when she wants to be, and answered, 24th of December 1997 to 31st of July 1991. She smiled at him, looking innocent. "Your aura looks older than it should, both yours and the girl you hang around with, Miss Granger. I've been trying to work out what would make your aura age like that. But when you spoke to me, your aura reacted to mine like we were friends, and not just casual friends either, but best friends. But if we were close friends, I would know, wouldn't I? So we must have been friends in a time I can't remember, and no one remembers the future. Why did you come back?" Luna said all that in a tone that a normal person might use to talk about the weather. Harry was still on edge, but relaxing a little now. We didn't mean to come back, it just happened to us. But it's given us an opportunity to help a lot of people. Luna, please don't tell anyone about this. If people know, they will try to learn about the future and change it to suit them, or they may decide that it's more important to keep time the same as it was before. Harry didn't know it, but a dark look came over his face as he remembered the things that were going on during the war. Trust me, you don't want that future. Sounds lonely, the blonde girl said. Having to keep so much of your life a secret from everyone. Do you want to be friends again? The question took Harry by surprise, and he almost forgot to answer. I would love that, Luna, and I'm sure Hermione would love it as well. Harry helped Luna take everything back to the Ravenclaw's common room. Luna answered the riddle, opening the door and letting them both in. Harry was standing next to the stairs that led to the Ravenclaw girls' dorms. As both houses were houses in a tower, they had similar layouts for the common rooms, though Ravenclaw had a whole library of books instead of wall decoration. While Harry looked around, his eyes fell on a statue of who he assumed was Ravenclaw herself. The statue was wearing a tiara that looked familiar to Harry, though he couldn't remember where he had seen it before. Luna reappeared at the bottom of her stairs, pulling her trunk behind her. She opened it, and Harry started handing her the things he was carrying. He had agreed to put a simple ward on her trunk. His warding was not very good and would probably collapse in 2 or 3 days, but he could keep anyone apart from himself and Luna from being able to open it until then. But she would be home by then, and her things would be safe. He would have excluded himself from the spell if he could, but the spell he knew was meant for someone to protect their own stuff, not someone else's. So he could add people apart from himself to the permission list, but couldn't remove himself as the caster. Harry left the Ravenclaw's common room, still trying to work out where he had seen the tiara before. It wasn't like he had seen a lot of fancy jewelry in his life. Chapter 5. Chapter text Chapter 5 Harry's summer turned out to be amazing. Sirius had been successful in getting Grimmauld Place looking and feeling like a real home. Having money to spend on help, and actually being able to walk into a business to hire that help, had made the cleaning of Grimmauld Place a lot easier. Hermione had spent a lot of time with him at Grimmauld Place as well. With both of her parents working at their dental practice during the week, one of her parents would drop her at Harry's home, and the two of them would spend time together. Of course, they got their homework out of the way in the first week. Thanks to Harry giving Creature the basilisk fang to destroy the locket, the house elf was a lot more willing to help Harry, and he hadn't called Hermione a mudblood all summer. Instead, the elf was helping them get to the books in the Black Library that Sirius had understandably banned the two teens from. They were researching how to get past the wards and traps that they knew were on the Gaunt Shack before they even considered going anywhere near the building. They both remembered what had happened to Dumbledore's hand, and neither of them had any intention of experiencing that for themselves, especially as they hadn't been able to find the curse that Tom used. And without the curse, it was almost impossible to find the counter curse. That's not to say their summer was all work. Sirius had gone out of his way to take the two of them to have fun as well. He had taken them to a professional Quidditch match, a dueling competition, the beach, even Oakwood Park. The five of them, Harry, Sirius, and the Grangers, went out to eat together a few times as well. Harry's birthday had been especially memorable, as Sirius and Hermione had worked together and had arranged a day at a go-kart center. The three of them had fun racing against everyone. Harry was surprised to find Hermione could be a bit of a speed demon when she wanted to be. With her aversion to brooms from her fear of heights, she had never had the opportunity to show off that part of herself in all the years Harry had known her. After that, they were joined by the Granger parents, and Sirius took them to Ambrosia, the most exclusive restaurant in magical Britain. The food had been amazing, though the atmosphere was a bit stuffy for Harry's taste. Overall, Harry's birthday experience was good for Harry and Hermione, as well as being good for Sirius. It reminded Harry and Hermione why they were pressing to change the future instead of running off to another part of the world, leaving Britain and letting the country that had turned its back on Harry until they wanted him to save them rot. It was also good for Sirius to build some good memories, after his years of Dementor exposure. Remus finally turned up 2 weeks before the start of the new school year. Harry had expected Remus and Sirius to immediately hit it off, so he was shocked and surprised when instead Sirius had punched Remus, sending him careening to the floor. "I guess I deserved that," Remus said as he rubbed at the bruise that was slowly starting to develop on his jaw. "Damn right you deserved it. You left me to rot in Azkaban. I thought you had betrayed James and killed Wormy. I thought it was what you deserved. You should have known better. You also didn't once look in on Harry." Dumbledore said Harry was safe. "You're a marauder. It's not Dumbledore's responsibility to check on Harry. It was yours." Dumbledore said there were anti-werewolf wards to keep Greyback and his pack away from Harry. "You could have still looked in on him from afar." Dumbledore dropped the ball. He wasn't checking up on Harry, and Lily's sister was treating him like shit. It was easy to see that Sirius was not happy with Remus, and I have been out of that hell for months. "Why is it only now you came looking for me?" "I didn't know. I was in Norway teaching English. I only got back into the country yesterday, so when I heard about your release today, I came right over," Remus explained as he finally climbed back to his feet. "Why did you come back?" Harry asked. "Why suddenly return to Britain now?" Harry was sure he already knew the answer, but asked it anyway. "Dumbledore is having trouble finding a defense against the dark arts professor, something about the previous one taking liberties. It was an opportunity to come home for a year, and I would get to see you again, Harry." Remus explained his side, and Harry mentally nodded as that was what he thought. Considering he had met Lupin originally as his defense professor, it wasn't a huge leap in logic. Taking liberties. I guess that's one way to describe a teacher sleeping with a number of his students and getting too pregnant, Hermione said from the doorway. Harry hadn't heard Hermione come in, but Creature knew to let her straight in whenever she came over. With Hermione there, she and Harry retreated to Harry's room after a quick and polite introduction between Hermione and the soon-to-be Professor Lupin. The first thing Hermione did when they got to Diagon Alley for their back-to-school shopping run was to drop into Magical Menagerie and get Crookshanks. Harry had slipped Hermione a few extra galleons to get things for the cat. Knowing how much Hermione had missed her pet Sirius, had insisted on buying both Harry and Hermione new trunks. Hermione had tried to refuse, but Sirius had insisted, calling it a thank you for her part in helping to catch the rat, combined with an early birthday present. Hermione had given in, only to then discover just how fast Sirius was going with their trunks. Each one contained a large freestanding wardrobe that grew out of the trunk when you opened one compartment, a full bookshelf when you opened the second, a chilled compartment for storing potions ingredients, and a second shelving unit, not unlike the bookshelf, but sized to hold their other possessions. Harry's had a tall section where he could keep his broom, for example. Hermione's trunk also had a vanity table with a large mirror in another compartment. They had both been surprised to find that the Monster Book of Monsters was missing from their book lists, until Hermione had worked it out. Because they had prevented the basilisk from petrifying students, the real culprit of the murder Hagrid was accused of was never revealed. While they had kept Hagrid out of Azkaban, they had also cost him his chance at teaching. Harry was on the fence about that. On one hand, his friend had loved teaching and knew his stuff, but on the other, Hagrid was a bad teacher. Maybe it was better for the students to have a different teacher, even if it meant Hagrid was left where he had been. After they had gotten everything, leaving books until last, mostly so they didn't have to carry Hermione's books for every subject around with them, they went to Fortescue's ice cream parlor. Dan and Emma had grumbled a little over their teeth, but had quickly given in to Hermione's pleading. Harry got a strawberry sundae, and Hermione had a large bowl of chocolate ice cream with caramel sauce. As they ate, Hermione discussed what subjects they would take this year at length. She was going to take every class again, more because they wanted access to the Time Turner again. They had considered having Harry try to take every subject as well, but even with his improved grades over his first time taking his first 2 years, they didn't think that Professor McGonagall would agree. His grades were good, but not that good. He did agree to take a third class. Hermione's argument was that he could coast through care of magical creatures and divination to OWL level. He had opted for ancient runes because Muggle studies was a joke, according to Hermione, and while he was okay at maths, arithmancy didn't hold any appeal for him. It was soon the 1st of September, and Harry and Hermione met up at King's Cross after saying goodbye to the Grangers and Sirius. It was Harry's most emotional departure for Hogwarts ever. After an entire summer of spending time with Sirius, a Sirius with better mental health than Harry had ever seen him with, Harry had gotten a taste of a real home, and leaving it was hard. The two teens settled into a compartment, glad that they had changed enough that the train wouldn't be attacked by Dementors this time. Without Sirius breaking out of prison, there was no need for the Ministry to set the damned demons loose on the public. However, without the Dementors, there was no need for Dumbledore to station Professor Lupin on the train either. Just after the train had left King's Cross, there was a polite knock on the door to the compartment. At their acknowledgement, the door slid open to reveal a second-year Ravenclaw and an old friend who wasn't supposed to know them yet but still had, in her own odd way, worked out some of the truth, despite no one else having been able to. "Hello, Harry. Hello, Hermione. Do you mind if I sit here?" Luna Lovegood asked. Harry and Hermione both smiled. Hermione invited her in while Harry hefted Luna's trunk into the overhead rack. Luna sat down next to Hermione. "So, Luna, Harry said you worked out mine and Harry's little secret." Hermione said to Luna. She nodded to Hermione. It was the only option that made sense. Both of you are older than your bodies, at least your magical aura is, and the two of you are surrounded by Raxperts. Most teenagers aren't troubled by thoughts heavy enough to attract even a third of the swarm you have. Most people wouldn't have seen it, but Harry had known Hermione for over 8 years, so he saw the muscles in Hermione's jaw flex as she bit back her comments on Luna's made-up creatures. Instead, Hermione remembered she needed to focus on what is important at the moment. "You understand that you can't tell anyone about where we are from, right? It would be dangerous for us, and it would make our task a lot harder." "I promise. It's not like anyone would believe Loony Lovegood anyway." Luna shrugged. "You should never call yourself that," Hermione insisted firmly as she put an arm around the younger girl. "If you accept what they call you, then the bullies win, and once they win once, they keep coming back." Luna just looked at them in the off-putting way she had and said, "But they keep coming back anyway." Both Harry and Hermione silently vowed that, if they had any say in the matter, the people bullying Luna were going to stop. They would have said it out loud, but before they could, Luna changed the subject. "So I know you came from the future and you want to change something, but Harry never said what it is you want to change." Harry hesitated for a few seconds, but decided that if he was in for a penny, he was in for a pound. "We want to stop the Second Blood War from happening." When we left, I can't really say we were losing. We had lost. The Death Eaters had taken over the Ministry, and they were rounding up Muggle-born witches and wizards and sending them to camps. We can't say for sure what was happening there, but none ever returned, so all we can do is speculate. Death Eaters were running Hogwarts as well, and we know some students were taken to control their parents. Harry specifically didn't look at Luna as he said that. There were gangs everywhere looking for undesirables, hoping to collect on the reward offered by the new regime. I was actually undesirable number one. We hadn't given up, but honestly, looking back, it was a fool's quest. However, it was that or lay down and die. Harry didn't realize it, but while he talked, his voice became hollow and his eyes stopped focusing on the present as he watched the memories playing out in his head. Luna launched herself at Harry and pulled him down so he was seated between her and Hermione, and the two sandwiched him in a much-needed hug. The day slowly passed them by, and Hermione and Luna sat chatting for a long while. Harry hadn't considered that Hermione would miss having another girl she could talk with. Eventually, the trolley came by, and Harry got them a few sweets each. Sirius had told the Grangers that the lunch trolley was all sugar, so the two more responsible adults had insisted on making lunch for Harry and Hermione. Harry was only looking for something to have after his chicken salad sandwiches. After lunch was an enjoyable game of every flavor roulette, where Harry and Luna got to have a laugh at Hermione when she got a rhubarb-flavored bean, her own personal food hell. Of course, Hermione and Luna got to return the favor when Harry got a bean flavored like jellied eels. They were in the middle of laughing at Harry when the door to the compartment slid open. The three of them turned to find Draco Malfoy and his two security trolls standing in the doorway. "Well, if it isn't Potter and the lying little mudblood." "What do you mean lying? I don't recall lying to you." Hermione sounded indignant. You told me you were a pureblood, Malfoy insisted. No, I didn't. I have never said I was anything but a muggle-born. Hermione knew where this was going now, and she had to suppress a smirk. She had laid the foundation for this little prank 2 years ago. She expected it to happen far earlier, and as time had gone on, she suspected the Malfoy heir had seen through her words and that the prank was over before it had begun. You said you were from the house Dagworth Granger. It was easy to see how angry the blonde was now. Hermione slipped into her lecture mode. No, you said you hadn't heard of the name Granger, so I must be a muggle-born. I was curious if I was the first magical in my family, so I looked up wizarding families to see if I could find any Grangers, Rawlings, Pickmans, and a few other material names from both sides of my family. The only name that jumped out as worth following up on was Dagworth Granger, but there was no relation. When you said there were no wizarding families with the name Granger, I corrected you. I told you that House Dagworth Granger was an old prominent wizarding family, that's it. Everything else was just you jumping to conclusions. As Hermione lectured, Malfoy grew angrier and angrier. You think you're so smart, mudblood, I'll teach you your place. His hand shot into his robes and pulled out his wand. He was just in the middle of pointing it at Hermione when he was hit by a spell from Harry. Expelliarmus. Malfoy's wand went flying. Harry probably could have caught it if he tried, but he was too busy casting his next spell, Levicorpus. At Harry's nonverbal spell, Malfoy was hoisted into the air by his ankle. His robes started to fall, so Harry, remembering the scene between his father and Snape, cast a quick sticking charm, adhering the robes to the boy's legs. After all, Harry didn't want to see what was under Malfoy's robes, and he suspected that the two girls wanted to see it even less. Crabbe and Goyle tried to rush Harry, but this time it was Hermione who was quickest of the mark, hitting the two with impedimenta jinxes, freezing them in place. Once the two trolls transfigured to look like students were dealt with, Harry walked up to Malfoy and looked him right in the face. Let's make this perfectly clear, Malfoy. If you ever draw your wand on Hermione again, you will be answering to me. No teachers, no bodyguards, and no daddy to protect you. Just you and me. And for now, here is a little taste. Harry cast a quick silencer, then drew back his fist and slammed it into Malfoy's nose with all the force he could muster. He felt satisfied hearing the crunching sound it gave off as it broke. Irv's the git right for breaking my nose in 6th year, Harry thought. Blood began pouring from Malfoy's nose, covering the top half of his head in the crimson liquid, standing out starkly against the Slytherin's blonde hair. While Malfoy silently cursed and screamed obscenities, Harry turned his back on Malfoy and picked up his bottle of pumpkin juice that he had gotten from the trolley witch and took a drink, also surreptitiously checking on Hermione and Luna. Hermione barely looked like anything was happening at all. That made sense. Compared to what the two of them had done in the past, this was nothing noteworthy. Luna was looking at Harry with a strange expression that he couldn't determine, but when she noticed him looking, she flashed him a weak smile. The violence was definitely off-putting to Luna, so Harry decided to end it. He pointed his wand at Malfoy's nose and cast a pisky. There was a second satisfying crunch as Malfoy's nose was fixed. It was Luna who had first fixed Harry's nose with that spell, and Harry had first-hand experience that fixing it was almost as bad as breaking it in the first place. Harry considered leaving Malfoy covered in his own blood, but the decision was taken out of his hands by Hermione when she cast a scouring charm on his face that was meant for cleaning cauldrons. It wouldn't do any damage, but it was definitely not a pleasant experience. Harry ended the silencing charm and asked, "Do we have an understanding?" When my father, Malfoy started to rant, but Harry hit him with the silencer again before he turned back to the girls. So, Luna, what's your favorite subject? Hermione had to hide a smile, as she knew exactly what Harry was doing, winding up Malfoy by acting as if he was unimportant. Luna lit up at the question. I like transfiguration. You get to be really creative. I can't wait until we start animal transfiguration. I want to turn something into a crumple-horned snorkack. Maybe if I can do that, my transfigured one can attract a real one. I always wondered, is there a smooth-horned snorkack? Harry asked instantly, and Hermione was unavailable to keep herself from scoffing at the idea. Not that I have heard of. Why? Luna asked, curiosity painted across her face. Then why specify them as crumple-horned? Why not just horned snorkack. Luna's face lit up like it was Christmas. I need to owl Daddy as soon as I get to the castle. Maybe there is a different subspecies of snorkack out there. If we can find that one, maybe it will give us a lead in looking for their cousins. Harry turned back to Malfoy and again tried talking to him, but was hit with a string of vitriol, so Harry returned the silencing charm again. It took another 45 minutes and 3 more silencing charms before Malfoy worked out that he needed to agree to leave them alone and not point his wand at Hermione, but eventually he did. Only then did Harry let Malfoy and his bookends go. The rest of the journey to Hogwarts was filled with telling Luna a few stories from the future and giving her an idea of the items they were looking for. They avoided mentioning Horcruxes and souls, not because they didn't trust Luna, but because it was better for the world that the information about them be lost so that people stopped trying to make them. They did tell her that they thought there was one at Hogwarts, but that they hadn't been able to find it yet, despite doing an organized, systematic search of the castle over the last 2 years at the castle. That's when Luna surprised them. You're going about it wrong. You shouldn't be trying to search the castle. You need to think how you would hide something important in the castle. Suddenly, bidden by Luna's words, Harry started to connect a few memories. Him hiding Snape's book in the room of requirement and creating a marker in the piles of junk with a bust, a wig, and a tiara. Dumbledore telling Harry about how Voldemort was obsessed with the Hogwarts founders. Seeing the statue of Ravenclaw in their common room with a strangely familiar tiara on its head that he was sure he had seen before. Harry threw his arms around Luna and hugged her. "Thank you, Luna, thank you." He turned to Hermione. "I know where it is. I know where it is. Really. It's in the room of requirement, the hidden things room. I saw it in 6th year, but I had no clue what it was." "That's brilliant, Harry. That only leaves 2 more to get, and we know where one of them is." Hermione, caught up in Harry's excitement, jumped to her feet and threw her arms around Harry, who had just released Luna. As Hermione hugged him, Harry suddenly found he was aware of Hermione's chest as she held him close. The de-aging had robbed them of their physical development, and with it, the awareness that came from Hermione's hugs in the later years. Now he was aware that she was almost 14 already, and his bushy-haired best friend was once again quickly turning into the beautiful young woman that he remembered from before, the one he had first seen, to his own chagrin, at the Yule Ball. The rest of the trip to Hogwarts passed extremely slowly. Each of them wishing time away so that they could get to the school had the inevitable effect of making every second feel like a few minutes. Harry tried to focus on telling Luna tales from the previous timeline, mostly focusing on what happened in his first 2 years. As that time was past them, it felt safe to talk about in detail. Luna was a good listener, oohing and ahhing at his tales of trolls, flying keys, giant chess sets, giant spiders, a basilisk, and a dark lord. But Harry's mind kept drifting back to the room of requirement and the fragment of Tom's soul that was waiting for him there. Chapter 6. Chapter text, Chapter 6. Harry and Hermione were finding third-year classes as easy as they found first and second year. They both found Trelawney less infuriating, given they now knew that she did actually give genuine prophecy. Strangely, she also stopped with the whole grim nonsense this year, which made them wonder if the seer was actually seeing Sirius and was misinterpreting what she saw, though she didn't quit with the warnings of fire and death in his future. The one class that wasn't just a breeze was Ancient Runes, and that was just for Harry because the class was only new for him. Memorizing the runes for younger Futhark, a Nordic rune set, was challenging, but as Harry had a lot less studying to do, it was more than manageable. Care of magical creatures was easy, but also different. Hermione was right when she guessed that the new teacher wasn't Hagrid. Instead, they had a middle-aged man, Professor Goldhorn, teaching the class. His first few lessons were on owls, crups, and neasels. He had told them he was taking a probability approach to deciding what creatures they would study. The more likely they were to come into contact with a creature, the sooner they would learn about it. It made sense to them, but the two did find the class a little boring compared to Hagrid's classes, though Hermione did look rather smug when the Neasel ignored everyone else and jumped into her arms. They got to the room of requirement on the weekend. Hermione had used the time turner to give them a perfect alibi, and they ducked into the room of hidden things not long before curfew. As long as they were less than 6 hours in the room, then they would still be back in the common room on time. Hermione had never seen the room of hidden things before and was equal parts fascinated and horrified. On one hand, the room was a pile of disorganized mess that needed cleaning. On the other, the room was almost like an archaeologist's dream. There were also a number of books hidden there, but the condition of a lot of the books was bad enough that it was almost blasphemous to the bushy-haired bibliophile. One book that looked like someone had used it as target practice particularly upset her. Searching for the diadem took them over an hour, as the mounds of hidden objects were not easy to navigate, and the hall was huge, at least 10 times larger than the Great Hall. Eventually, Harry spotted the familiar chipped bust of an ugly old warlock and called to Hermione, knowing they were close. They started digging through a few of the neighboring piles, looking for the legendary lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. It took them another hour to find it, only because Hermione found it first and discarded it into a pile. It was only when Harry was rechecking the piles of discarded items that he found it. He held it up to look at it and to make sure it was what they were looking for when Hermione spoke up. "Harry, why are you wasting your time looking at an old piece of costume jewelry? We need to find the tiara." Hermione sounded a little annoyed at him, but he could tell she was just vexed that the search was taking so long. Hermione, what does it look like I'm holding to you?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. "A gaudy plastic toy tiara that looks like it belongs to a 5-year-old girl. Why?" "Because I think this is the diadem we are looking for," Harry told her. "Harry, don't be ridicule." Hermione paused, and then there was a flash of understanding in her eyes. Oh, it must have been under some type of perception filter spell. Hermione started thinking it through out loud. Anyone looking for it would probably see anything but the diadem. No, not anything, but something that they would consider unimportant. But why could you see it, Harry? Maybe because you had seen it before when you weren't looking for it. No, that doesn't make sense. People could recognize the diadem after accidentally running into it, so it must be something about you specifically, Harry. Oh, I know. It's the protection from your mum. It specifically defends you from Voldemort's magic, so the perception filter never took hold on you. Hermione's rambling finally faded away as Harry shook his head in amusement before he pulled a basilisk fang from a pouch in his pocket. "Okay, let's destroy it. Are you sure this is a Horcrux? It would be a shame to destroy such an artifact. I mean, it's Ravenclaw's diadem. It's supposed to make the wearer smarter. That's such amazing magic that it's important to preserve it if we can." "I can feel it, Hermione. It's like the locket," Harry told her as he looked around for something to place the Horcrux on so he could stab it. "But you need to be sure, Harry." Hermione pleaded, but Harry was too focused on his task to hear the tone in voice. "I'm sure, Myone. Trust me." Harry answered as he spotted a table that was whole but looked as though someone had spilled an acid or something on it, destroying the looks of the table. Harry set the diadem on the table and prepared to stab it with the fang. However, his danger senses went wild, and he jumped back from the diadem quickly. However, he found that the danger wasn't from the diadem itself, but from the beam of red light that came from his left and would have hit his side if he hadn't moved. He looked to the left, trying to find the source of the spell, only to see Hermione with her wand pointed at him moving through the motions to cast another spell. Harry dived behind a pile of hidden things, dodging Hermione's second stunner. "Hermione, what are you doing?" "The diadem is too impotent to let you destroy it, Harry," Hermione said, though her voice was emotionless. Harry could believe Hermione hexing him in a fit of rage or slapping him silly if she was upset because he had done something stupid. She was the type of person who did things with a burning passion, but she was never cold like this. "Hermione, this isn't you. The Horcrux is using you to defend itself." Harry tried to reason with her, but he still pulled out his wand to defend himself. "No, Harry, it's not the Horcrux. We can cleanse the diadem and protect it. I'm sure I can work out how to do it. I just need to use the diadem, then I'll be smart enough to fix everything." Harry had heard enough. He couldn't let Hermione put the Horcrux on her head. He stood out from behind the pile of junk he was sheltering behind and fired a stunner at Hermione. She held her ground and put up a shield reflecting Harry's spell back at him. The two started trading spells back and forth, both of them sticking to non-lethal and easily reversible prank spells. Even if both of them were going all out in trying to subdue the other, subconsciously neither wanted to hurt the other. Eventually, Harry was able to catch Hermione's ankle with a jelly-legs jinx, and when she lost her balance, he hit her with a full body bind. I'm sorry, Hermione, but I think that the diadem was influencing you the same way the diary influenced Ginny. Harry told her as he cleared all the junk off of a sofa that looked like a tiger had made it into a scratch toy at some point, but would still be more comfortable for Hermione than laying in a pile of random junk. He levitated her onto the seat, picked up the Horcrux that had been knocked over in the fight, set it back on the table, and stabbed the thing with the fangs still in his hand. Black ichor bubbled up from where Harry stabbed it and screamed in pain and fury at what Harry had done. After Harry was finished, he went and sat next to Hermione, pulling her wand from where she still held it in her hand, and started performing the counter jinxes on her. As soon as the full body bind was lifted, Hermione threw herself at him. For a moment, Harry thought she was going to start slapping him for destroying the diadem, but instead she pulled him into a hug and started crying into his shoulder, choking out the words, I'm sorry, between sobs. It took time for Harry to help Hermione put herself together enough to explain. It was like I was under the Imperious curse. It kept telling me that I needed to kill you and put on the diadem. It was so strong, Harry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't fight it. I tried and tried, but I couldn't do anything. Hermione, you say you couldn't fight it, but think about the spells you cast. He paused for a moment so Hermione could think about it. Not one of the spells you cast would have hurt me, and you know plenty of spells that could have killed me if you hit me with them. Yet every spell you cast wouldn't have given me worse than a headache. So don't tell me you didn't fight it. You fought it hard, Hermione. That was indeed what Hermione needed to hear, as it calmed her down somewhat. But even then, it wasn't an instant cure. Harry needed to hug her for almost half the night before they were ready to leave and go back to bed. They left the room and got under the invisibility cloak before Hermione pulled out her time turner and gave it a bunch of turns. Harry had thought that they would go back in time inside the room, but Hermione had quickly put a stop to that idea. Harry, do you have any idea what would happen to us if we traveled back in time to a time before the Room of Requirement was opened? Hermione had asked, and Harry had replied in the negative. Do I? And I don't want to find out by experimenting like that. What if we go back and we are inside a wall? Both of them had shuddered at that idea and had agreed that they would do all their time travel in places that were always present, if it was possible. With one more Horcrux destroyed, the two of them turned their mind to the ring. Thanks to what Dumbledore told Harry in the previous timeline, they knew that particular Horcrux was in the Gaunt family hovel outside of Little Hangleton. The problem was, that was all they knew. Well, that and Dumbledore had suffered a curse while collecting the ring. The first step was easy enough. Hermione had her parents send her an atlas of the UK. After that, it had just been a matter of looking the village up, and Little Hangleton was just a little dot in the middle of nothing in the county of Yorkshire. Now they had a location, but not much else. If they were at home, Hermione would have gone to the library and asked for a copy of the survey map for the area, in the hope they could work out likely spots where the Gaunt property was, but such a map wouldn't be in Hogwarts library. So their best course of action was to go there. Only, that was rather difficult when they were supposed to be in school. They couldn't just disappear from the school. Well, they could. Even without the Marauder's map, each of them knew at least 3 ways out of the castle and 2 ways in. But as they had an entire village to search, it wasn't like they could get that done in a couple of hours. It could take them up to a day to locate the shack, and maybe up to a week to survey the place before they could do anything. On top of that, there was the reasonable restriction on underage sorcery to consider. How could they get the ring if they couldn't use any magic? They would need a competent adult with them to cast the spells, but who could they tell the truth to without them being dragged to St. Mungo's? Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF October came along, and with it the first Hogsmeade weekend of the year. Harry was able to go this year because Sirius had signed his forms straight away, instead of needing to coerce his uncle into doing so. Harry and Hermione decided to go down and have a look around, more so for a break than the expectation that anything would be new. They had been trying to prepare for scouting out Little Hangleton, but were having trouble still. They decided to walk to the village this time. It was cold out due to being in the Scottish Highlands, but the weather was clear and the walk was enjoyable. About halfway down to the village, Hermione had gotten a little cold and had decided that the best way to deal with it was to hug Harry and steal his body warmth. The walk was thoroughly enjoyable, and the two soon found their way into the village. First stop, as always when Hermione was a part of the group, was tomes and scrolls. Hermione asked if they had any books on the Gaunt family, but they didn't. Business out of the way, they still looked around at the books. Harry found a book on basic occlumency that he decided to get, mostly because he wanted to check if Snape had accidentally taught him anything, or if, as Harry suspected, he was making it easier for Voldemort to invade his mind. Hermione, being Hermione, had brought herself 3 new books with complicated titles that Harry wouldn't even try to understand. Once they were done in the bookshop, they started checking other stores. They went into the apothecary and bought enough ingredients for half of the Gryffindor third years to practice potions on for the rest of the year. A number of their potential plans needed potions, and it was easier to buy the ingredients than try and swipe them from the school stores. They did find one shop they had ignored previously, but decided to take a look. Furlet and Son seemed to be a Wicks pawn shop, so Harry and Hermione looked around. There were a lot of the usual things you would see in a Muggle counterpart, such as a display case of jewelry, although there were separate sections, each for purely decorative pieces and pieces that had some type of magical effect. There was also stuff that would never appear in a Muggle pawnbroker, for example the selection of broomsticks that were mounted on one section of wall. Harry, of course, went to them first to check them out. There were a few clean-sweep 5s and 6s, and a Comet 230. Decent brooms, but nothing exciting. They browsed the other shelves as well. Most of it was boring to the two of them. Self-stirring cauldrons, records from magical artists, books from Hogwarts subjects that people had dropped, including a stack of Lockhart's books that they may as well have relabeled as fuel for fire. There was an enchanted tea set that Hermione looked at for a while, but decided against buying. One thing they grabbed immediately when Harry found it was a wizarding tent. Even second-hand it set Harry back 85 galleons, but the inside was in better shape than the one they had borrowed from the Weasleys for the Horcrux hunt, and with them keeping their distance from Ron this time, that tent didn't seem like it would be available if they needed it. Not that they planned on needing it, but it seemed like a good idea to have it, and not need it rather than need it, and not have it. Once they finished looking around the pawn shop, they started hitting the old favorites, in part because it had been so long since they had been there, but also because they weren't supposed to have been to the village before, and they wanted to keep up appearances. They went to Honeyduke's, where Harry had to struggle not to spend too much there. He bought himself a supply of their best chocolate, jellied slugs, and a large bag of mint humbugs. Hermione got herself a supply of sugar quills and a few cauldron cakes. After that, they were feeling the chill of the Scottish climate and decided to retreat inside the 3 broomsticks and warm up a bit. Hermione grabbed a seat in one of the few free booths, and Harry went to get the drinks. It was good seeing Rosmerta smiling again, even if it was a little strained as she did her best to serve the large crowd of Hogwarts students on top of her regulars. The war hadn't been kind to her, and while she hadn't been targeted specifically, she had faced at least one unforgivable curse. Plus, the war wasn't exactly good for profits, as everyone had stayed hidden at home rather than going out to drink. "What can I get you, love?" Rosmerta finally worked her way through the crowd of customers battling for her attention and addressed Harry. "2 large warm butter beers, please," he replied, placing a galleon on the counter. "Coming right up." She swept the coin into a drawer and set 2 large beer glasses under a barrel. With a tap of her wand, the sweet buttery beer started to slowly flow into the glasses, warming as it went until it was slightly steaming in the glass. "So, you're a third year, right? I don't recall seeing you here before." Rosmerta asked as she counted out his change, 10 sickles and a few nuts. Harry dropped the nuts in a large whiskey bottle that took the place of a tip jar and pocketed the silver. "Yeah, this is my first time visiting the village. A few of the older years recommended here to Hermione and myself." He pointed Hermione out to the woman, "and a warm drink to ward off the chill seems like just the thing." "Well, I recommend this, or fire whiskey for warding off chills, but you'll need to wait a few years before you get to order that." Now you and your girlfriend enjoy, and come see me if you need anything." She said the last bit as she set the 2 beer glasses in front of Harry, and before he could say anything else, she was off dealing with another customer. Harry went to the table Hermione had claimed and sat down next to her. Hermione took her butter beer and took a drink. "It's been years since I last had a butter beer." Her words barely registered to Harry, and noticing that something was off, Hermione asked, "Harry, what's up?" Again, Harry was lost in his thoughts, so Hermione poked him and asked again, "It's nothing. Rosmutter just assumed we were a couple, and it got me wondering how many other people think that. I mean, as far as most of the school is concerned, we disappear together a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised that Sirius and your parents think the same thing." "Probably about half," Hermione replied. "Lavender and Parvati grill me on being your girlfriend every few months, and Mum has made a few comments, so she definitely thinks we are together. It doesn't help that I am a hugger, and I hug you a lot more than anyone else." She had obviously thought about this already, but if her dorm mates were teasing her a little about it, then how could she not? Harry, knowing Hermione as well as he did, could hear the hesitation in her voice. She was worried that Harry would stop the hugs now that he realized that it led to people thinking they were a couple. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her into a side hug. "Well, I for one wouldn't give up your hugs for the world," he said, taking a drink from his butter beer. Now that he was drinking it again, and Hermione reminded him how long it had been, he realized he really had missed this. Not just the butter beer, but the sitting there enjoying it with someone he cared about. That had been even longer since his last good butter beer. Once the war was in full swing, butter beer was more of something to do while you fretted and waited for news. "So, Harry, I had an idea when you bought the tent," Hermione said, still snuggled into his side. "Oh," Harry asked, "you and I should go on a camping trip to Little Hangleton over Easter," Hermione told him. Harry was a little surprised by the idea, but instantly saw some problems. "I doubt you parents would agree to their 14-year-old daughter going off across the country on her own with no one but a teenage boy. I'm not sure Sirius would be too happy with that either, or maybe he would be, but for all the wrong reasons." "Well, that's easy enough. We won't tell them. We normally stay at school over Easter anyway, so none of them would think it weird that we don't go home, and if we aren't here, everyone else will just assume we went back to London." She was right, Harry thought. As long as they left on the express, the teachers and other students would just assume they went home for the break. "Okay, what do we need to pull this off?" Harry asked, not expecting Hermione to have a full plan yet, but he needed to know what she had worked out so far. Hermione pulled out a sheet of parchment, and the two of them started to plan what they would need. Chapter 7. Chapter text Chapter 7. Only after Harry's second Halloween, in a row where nothing went wrong, did Harry start to relax. He and Hermione were still trying to work out where Tom would have hidden the last Horcrux, but they were also able to focus on their schoolwork for a bit. Harry was having fun learning about runes. It really was an interesting subject. As Hermione didn't need to study for her classes, she didn't actually need the time turner, especially as she wasn't putting in the effort in Muggle studies and divination. Of course, the two of them did actually use the time turner, but it was mostly so Hermione could have some free time. They did some prep for their planned trip at Easter, as Hermione had Harry brewing enough potions to last the two of them a week. However, there actually wasn't a lot of preparation they could do at school, though they both had a list of things they needed to do over Christmas. One thing neither Harry or Hermione noticed, but was noticed by a number of other people, was that they had gotten closer. It wasn't uncommon to find the two of them cuddled up together on one of the Gryffindor sofas near the fire. Even when they were completely ignoring each other while doing something else, they were still touching each other. Nothing inappropriate, but they would lean into each other or use each other as a pillow or footrest. According to Lavender Brown, even when they sat at the table together, nearly always one of their knees or elbows would be in contact with the other. It had gotten to the point that the Weasley twins had opened a book on the date and time of their first kiss and their first declaration of love. Some people wanted to bet on when Harry and Hermione would become a couple, but others argued that the two were already together. Seeing as working out a winner to that bet would be difficult, the twins decided against running that particular bet. That didn't mean that they didn't have a lot of bets. Even a few of the professors had placed bets on when the couple would have their first kiss. Christmas was different for Harry this year. He had experienced Christmas at the Dursleys, being locked away and being ignored. He had experienced Christmas at Hogwarts, presents, a few well wishes, and dinner. In the previous timeline, he had even experienced a Weasley Christmas, an explosion of noise and chaos where Mrs. Weasley tried to get everyone to eat their weight in food. Christmas with Sirius this year was just the two of them, the same as last year, but this year it felt like there was something missing. Two of them exchanged gifts. Sirius had gone over the top again, getting Harry a dragon leather jacket, a full set of new high-quality Quidditch armor, a professional-level practice snitch, and the new top-of-the-line firebolt broom. They had a dinner of roast goose, a turkey being far too big for the two of them, and Creature, with all the trimmings. After dinner, Sirius side-alonged Harry to a Quidditch stadium in London that let the public in to fly when it wasn't being used for a game or a team practice. Harry spent the 2.5 hours just having fun pushing his new broom to its limits, while Sirius joined him on Harry's old Nimbus. The day after Christmas, Harry had a chance and took it. Sirius had had a lot to drink after they got back from flying, and he was sleeping late with a bad case of bottle flu. Harry took the opportunity to use the fireplace in the kitchen and flew to the leaky cauldron. Pub was deserted, and there were closed shutters over the bar, as it was the day after Christmas and only about 7:30 in the morning. The flue only remained open because it was the access to Diagon Alley. Harry slipped out of the back door as quietly as he could. He didn't want to disturb anyone who was still sleeping. He tapped his wand in the sequence. He remembered to open the wall, and he was in Diagon Alley. There were a few people in the alley, mostly shop owners who were getting their stores ready. The day after Christmas was always a busy one, with people spending money they had been given the day before and others exchanging presents for various reasons. Harry wasn't particularly interested in the shops, though he was here to visit Gringotts. The White Marble Building opened earlier than most of the shops, so Harry made his way up the stairs and into the bank. One advantage to getting here so early was there was only one other customer in the bank, and Harry was able to see a goblin straight away. Harry took a trip to his vault and took out 400 galleons, and then converted half of his gold into British pounds. If he was being honest, Sirius probably wouldn't have said anything if Harry had said he was going to the bank. But as the money was for the Easter trip, he didn't want Sirius getting curious, especially as Harry had just pulled the equivalent of almost £2,000 out of his vault. He and Hermione didn't think they would need that much money, but they didn't want to be in a position where they needed the money and did not have it. Their biggest planned expense on the trip was food. Hermione said that spending money in the local shops to buy the things they need would likely be noticed in a small village. Harry was way overestimating how much they would need, but who knew what hidden costs they would come across that they didn't expect. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, Hermione was happy to spend Christmas with her parents. They went to visit family during the holiday, and it was good to see her extended family again, though she was missing Harry a bit. She had gotten lucky during one trip. Her parents had stopped into a motorway service station to refuel the car and to get a cup of tea. There was a shop nearby selling more local map books from all over the UK, and she was able to get a street map of Little Hangleton. Christmas Day was nice, with a traditional Granger family Christmas. She had gotten a lot of clothes from her parents and a wind-up pocket watch, as the magic around Hogwarts meant that her digital watch was almost useless. They also gave her some money to spend on books, as they couldn't get into Diagon Alley to get books without her taking them through the leaky cauldron. The day after Christmas, Harry came over for a visit, riding the bike he had received from Sirius last year. When she saw him, Hermione rushed over and gave him a hug before pulling him into the house. Harry said hello to her parents and chatted for a few minutes before he and Hermione retreated to her room. Hermione was surprised when Harry pushed what looked like almost £500 into her hand and 100 galleons. Before she could say anything and ask why Harry started talking, "It's half of the money I got out for the Easter fact-finding mission. I thought we should each hold half. Harry, this is way more than we need for what we are doing. We only need about £200 for everything and a few galleons for the night bus, so I think we will be bringing more than half the money back with us." Hermione said, exasperated that he would just give her so much money to look after. I know, Hermione, but what if there is a problem with putting up the tent and we need to get a hotel room? What if the only way to get the information we need is to bribe someone? We can always use the money for something else later. Or I can put what's left back in my vault, Harry said, and Hermione admitted that it made sense at least for the muggle money. She still didn't see the point of having so much gold, but didn't want to argue about it. She would just keep it safe and give it back to him once they were done. She then showed Harry the map book she had found and bookmarked. It would be a big help, as Harry remembered that the Gaunt shack was off a country road, and while the map showed there were a few of them, it would help them organize their search. With business out of the way, Hermione pulled them back to what she thought Harry was here for originally. She pulled a warped present from her trunk and handed it to Harry with a happy, Merry Christmas. Harry blushed, realizing that he had committed a slight faux pas. Harry removed the bright red paper from the present, revealing a wand holster designed to be worn on his forearm. It was made of dragon leather, which caused Harry to smile. Thank you, Hermione. I love it. Well, considering what happened with your wand, it seemed like a good idea, Hermione replied, thinking of the event that brought them to the past. Harry handed Hermione her present, wrapped in a powder blue that was pretty close to her favorite periwinkle blue. Hermione pulled the paper off to reveal a brown dragon leather book bag. She read the card that was still attached to the bag that listed the enchantments on it, an undetectable extension charm on the main pocket, letting it hold a lot more books, cushioning and protection charms to protect whatever was stored inside, and the whole thing was charmed to be light as a feather even when full of books. Hermione threw her arms around Harry for the second time in under 20 minutes, and this time refused to let go for a full 5 minutes, by which time Harry was calling her an insatiable cuddle monster. However, this only caused Hermione to laugh. After that, they returned to the kitchen, where they pulled out their homework and had each other look it over, not to correct the work they had done, but because they went too far sometimes and included information that wouldn't be taught for a few more years. After all, they were halfway through the NEWTS when they had gone on the run and had done a lot of the reading for their final year over the last few years. After Christmas was almost a non-event at Hogwarts. In contrast to the Dementors of Harry's first time living this year, the biggest school drama for Harry was Quidditch. About a week after the students had returned to school, Harry had taken his broom with him down to breakfast. Wood had heard about the new broom from Harry's dorm mates, and he had called for a team practice, ostensibly so they could get accustomed to the change in broom. However, as Harry played Seeker, and the Seeker didn't interact much with other players besides staying out of their way and dodging bludgers hit at them, it was obvious that Wood was just fanboying over the broom and wanted to see it fly. The Quidditch captain wasn't the only person who went nuts over the broom. Once the twins laid eyes on it, they insisted that it be given pride of place on the table where everyone could admire it. Of course, this drew the attention of people from other houses, and some looked impressed at the broom, while others looked dejected as they saw their house's chance at winning the Quidditch Cup die in front of them. Eventually, the crowd drew the attention of the blonde ferret, and he came over for his latest attempt at bravado. What's this, Potter? You got a new broom, decided to copy me by getting the 2001. Nope, I didn't get a Nimbus 2001, Harry said, sounding bored, but Hermione and a few others could see in his eyes he was anything but. Don't tell me you got a clean sweep. You do better on the outdated Nimbus you ride, Malfoy finished with a snort of derision. I didn't get a clean sweep either, Harry said with a slight smile that some might have called a smirk. Getting impatient, Draco demanded, well, what did you get then? Some piece of foreign trash. Harry considered baiting Draco once more, but decided against it. He reached over and turned the firebolt so that the name was visible to Malfoy. Malfoy leaned in and read the inscription, and Harry was able to see the exact moment that Malfoy understood what he was looking at. His eyes widened, and his face lost what little color it had. Hermione, who was a little bitter at Malfoy's constant comments about her blood and parentage, said, what was it you were saying about the firebolt, Harry? That it's over 20 miles per hour faster than the Nimbus 2001. 22 miles per hour faster, and it reaches its top speed 28% faster as well. Seeing what Harry was doing to Malfoy, Ronald, who was sitting near them, joined in, and the firebolt has vastly improved handling compared to the Nimbus, able to take tight turns at a much higher speed. Malfoy stormed off, much to the laughter of the Gryffindors. Even the people from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw smiled as they saw Harry's chance to beat Slytherin, who were favourites this year only because the full team were all riding Nimbus 2001s, the fastest broom on the market, until the firebolt took the top spot. A few minutes later, Snape came striding over to the table. "Potter, Mr. Malfoy tells me you plan to use a firebolt in your upcoming Quidditch matches. This constitutes an unfair advantage, and to prevent such cheating I will be confiscating this broom." He reached across Harry and the table to grab the broom, but Harry slid in front of him, and while looking him dead in the face, said no. Snape was taken aback by this, but only a few seconds later the dungeon bat was off on one. "Why, you arrogant piece of filth. I am your professor, and you will respect my authority and hand over that broom." Harry stood his ground. "A professor who is abusing his authority to cheat," he said calmly. "That's it." Snape was yelling now. "You will be in detention every night for the rest of the year." The shouting had, of course, caught the attention of Professor McGonagall and everyone else on the grounds of the school, and the Lioness of Gryffindor came striding over. "Mr. Potter, what have you done this time?" "Nothing to warrant even a single detention, Professor," Harry said, and all the students, even the few Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws that were still around, started to agree with Harry. "What exactly did you do, Mr. Potter?" Snape went to jump in, but McGonagall cut him off. "I asked Mr. Potter first, Severus. You will have the opportunity to give your side as well." "Professor, I was sitting here enjoying my breakfast before Quidditch practice, and people were admiring the broom I got from my godfather for Christmas." Harry indicated the firebolt. "Malfoy comes over and has a look, then goes to speak to Snape, Professor Snape." Professor McGonagall corrected him. "Less than 2 minutes later, Professor Snape," Harry made the word professor sound like a question, "came over and tried to confiscate my broom for no reason." "I gave you my reasoning, Potter." Snape snapped at him. Harry nodded. "Yes, you did. You said that my broom was too good for me to be allowed to use it, then tried to take it because I couldn't be trusted to follow a rule you made up on the spot just to suit yourself." Snape started to shout at Harry, but Professor McGonagall cut him off. "Is that true, Severus? That broom is far too much of an advantage over the other teams. It's nothing but cheating. Strange you didn't have that opinion last year when your whole team was given Nimbus 2001s. If you go forward with this ban, it will apply to the 2001s as well. Plus, you can't confiscate a broom when a rule hasn't been broken yet. Now what are the 2 terms worth of detention for?" "Because I said no when he tried to take my broom," Harry told McGonagall. Professor McGonagall gave Snape a glare and said, "Mr. Potter, 5 points from Gryffindor for back, talking to a teacher. In future you are to keep a civil tongue and then come speak with me. You will not need to serve detention over this. Severus, follow me. Now." And McGonagall walked out of the hall with Snape following her, leaving a hall full of stunned students in their wake, including Harry, who didn't even think to tell the professor that he had been calm and civil. The match with the Slytherins was a week before the Easter holidays, and between Hermione wanting to go over their plans for their trip and Wood, who was pushing for them to spend every waking hour on the pitch running drills, Harry was ready for everything to be over with. The team had finally gotten a 2-day break just before the match, but only because the entire team had threatened to quit if Wood didn't calm down. It gave them all at least a chance to rest their muscles, so that the morning of the match, instead of screaming muscles that would have been an obstacle, they were only a little stiff and easily taken care of with a little stretching. Woods's pre-game speech was the same as the one he gave before every match, and Angelina, Alicia, and Katie all took the piss, which was as much tradition at this point as the speech itself was. Harry picked up his firebolt, followed his team out of the changing room and out onto the pitch. After the argument with Snape in January, nothing more was said about his broom being too good. Personally, Harry thought that Snape didn't have the guts to tell his Death Eater buddy Lucius Malfoy that the 14,000 galleons he had spent on the brooms for the Slytherin Quidditch team was going to be wasted because of a ban on broomsticks that were too good. Wood shook the hand of the Slytherin's Captain Flint, and the two looked like they were trying to break the other's hand. but they soon went back with their team. Madame Hooch sent the red ball straight up with a flick of her wand, and as one the 14 players kicked off from the ground and rose into the air. The two keepers shot for their goals, and Harry flew high to start the search for the snitch. Angelina shot forward to snatch the quaffle from the Slytherin chaser who had got to it first. Lee Jordan's commentary echoed around the stadium. Okay, and Potter is flying a firebolt today. According to which broomstick, the firebolt is the broomstick for the Quidditch World Cup this year. All the national teams are doing everything they can to get their hands on one, and who wouldn't? The firebolt is capable of going from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds. This broomstick also boasts an unbreakable braking charm, superb balance and precision, and it even hovers at reasonable mounting height when let go. Personally, I'd sell my kidney for one, but I don't think my kidney is worth enough to cover the cost of one. According to the captain of the English tea, Jordan's commentary was cut off by Professor McGonagall's voice. Mr. Jordan, you are here to commentate on Quidditch, not to advertise firebolts. Do the job properly or I'll find someone who will. Righto, Professor, let's go. Okay, Spinnet of Gryffindor has the quaffle. She passes it to Belle, who zips it back to Spinnet, who passes, no, it was a feint. She speeds towards the Slytherin goals. She dodges a bludger, didn't see who it was hit by. Tackled by Warrington, Slytherin now in position, passes to Flint, who passes to Montague, and it's intercepted by Belle. Nice bit of teamwork there from the Gryffindor beaters, forcing Montague out of possession after Flint had already thrown the quaffle. Belle makes a break for the Slytherin goals. Flint is pursuing, and he has the broom advantage, but Belle is a much lighter load for her broom to lug around. Flit catches up to Belle and foul. That dirty, stinking cheat. Madame Hooch blows up and awards Gryffindor a penalty after the Slytherin captain shoulder charges Belle, almost knocking her from her broom. Belle takes the penalty and Gryffindor scores. It's 10 points to Gryffindor and no points yet for the dirty cheats. Professor McGonagall cut in again and admonished Lee for unprofessional commentary, but Harry wasn't paying attention anymore. It looked like Slytherin was planning for a rough game. Here was proof that Flint wasn't a good captain, in Harry's opinion. The goal of their strategy was simple. If your opponent flinched when you approached, you had an advantage, but this was a Gryffindor team. The defining trait of the team was that they charged forward. Any strategist with 2 brain cells wouldn't have chosen this tactic against Gryffindor, and that said everything Harry needed to know about Flint. Harry turned his attention back to finding the snitch. The sooner he caught it, the less of a pounding his teammates would need to endure. Luck wasn't on Harry's side, however, and the match stretched on as an hour went by. Gryffindor was leading 110 to 60, but most of the points had come off penalties. While Gryffindor's lead was steadily increasing, they were still far from the magic number of 160 points to guarantee a win no matter who got the snitch. The girls had taken a beating from the Slytherin chasers, and Harry was seriously considering letting them in on the secret of the Room of Requirement. A hot tub would be perfect for them after this match. Then Harry saw something, and had to look twice. Once he was sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing, he burst into laughter. He turned his broom and shot straight at Malfoy, who saw Harry coming at him at speed and turned to speed away from him. Harry could tell Malfoy had no clue where the snitch was and was obviously making a guess based on the direction Harry was flying, so he just continued to follow Malfoy. Malfoy was fast, but Harry was faster. The blonde was quickly running out of the playing field and would soon be hitting the stands, and he was looking around for the snitch as well as checking that Harry was still following him. Malfoy ran out of room to not crash into the stands, so he went down and to the right, barely missing the stadium wall. The blonde looked back at Harry again to see where he had gone, but was surprised and a little scared to see that Harry was still following him and gaining. The Slytherin was obviously thinking that Harry hadn't seen the snitch and was just charging him down, but Harry remained focused on the glint of gold that was sitting in the twigs of Malfoy's broom. Malfoy started to sway and bank trying to shake Harry off, but the firebolt had much better handling than the Nimbus 2001. Once Harry was close enough, he poked his hand into the mass of twigs that the snitch was hidden in and grabbed the walnut-sized ball, winning Gryffindor the match by 200 points and almost guaranteeing them the Quidditch Cup this year. The stands went wild, and Harry was soon drawn into the team's celebrations. Malfoy tried to claim Harry had broken a rule by touching his broom, but as Madam Hooch explained, there was an exception in the rules allowing a seeker to retrieve a snitch from wherever it was hiding. The party in the Gryffindor common room that evening was legendary. McGonagall came to break them up at 1:30 in the morning, but actually decided to join them for half an hour before sending everyone to bed at 2 a.m. Chapter 8. Harry Potter and the Phoenix Wand, ch. 8. Chapter text. Chapter 8. Harry and Hermione were only a little surprised when the door to their compartment slid open as they pulled away from Hogsmeade for the Easter holidays. After all, people visited each other a lot on the train journeys. They were surprised that the person the sliding door had revealed was Luna. Their blonde friend hadn't mentioned that she was going home for the holiday. "Hello," Luna said in her regular, faraway voice as she came in and stood her trunk in the overhead rack with a swish and flick of her wand. "Hey, Luna," Harry greeted while Hermione just waved. "You didn't tell us you were going home for the holiday." "Oh, I suppose that's probably because I'm not going home this year," Luna said as she pulled out the latest issue of the Quibbler. "Oh, are you and your father off on an expedition then?" Hermione asked. "Daddy is going to Egypt to see if he can find any references to a smooth-horned snorkack. Daddy thinks if there was ever knowledge of a snorkack that has been forgotten, then Egypt is the best place to look. It's very exciting, but I won't be going with him." Luna sounded a little disappointed not to be going with her father. "If you're not going with your father, who are you going to be staying with?" Harry was confused now. "Well, I'm coming with you too, of course," Luna said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Both Harry and Hermione stared at the Ravenclaw, completely flabbergasted. There was silence for a minute until Hermione found her voice. "Luna, we aren't going on a holiday. We are looking for another object like the diadem. It could be dangerous." Luna shrugged. "It just feels like I need to go with you. Maybe you need me, or maybe it's something else, but something is saying I need to go with you," Luna told them in her usual ethereal manner. Harry and Hermione tried to convince Luna that it would be better if she didn't come with them, but Luna held firm, and there wasn't exactly a lot that the two of them could do about it. The only ways they had to force the issue were to basically take Luna back to the school or somewhere else and talk to an adult. Doing that would draw attention to the fact that Harry and Hermione were heading out for the week, something that they needed to avoid. They arrived at King's Cross in the early evening, waiting on the train until almost everyone was gone, and then slipping out into Muggle London. The three of them slunk into an alley where they wouldn't be seen, where Hermione grabbed Luna's hand as they apparated to the Forest of Dean. They had originally thought they would go straight to Little Hangleton from London, but once they considered how late they would get to the village, they had decided that they would camp for one night, arriving early enough the next day to have a look around. Between the three of them, they got the tent up in about a quarter of an hour. Harry and Hermione were surprisingly the most awkward at putting the tent together. They were too used to putting up the tent with a flick of their wands during their time on the run. But as they had to be careful of the restrictions on underage sorcery, they were doing it all by hand. Luna explained her experience with the tent by telling them that she had often put the tent up for her and her father when he was focused on something else. The inside of the tent was not dissimilar to a cheaper London flat. It had 2 bedrooms and a shower, but the kitchen and living space were combined. The furniture looked like it had been sorted from a Muggle second-hand store. They spent the evening eating some pre-made sandwiches and crisps they had picked up at the train station and going over their plan with Luna, making any modifications they needed to cover a third member of the group. The 3 children arrived on the outskirts of the village a little before midday, looking like campers in their mid-20s due to the aging potions that Hermione had spent the last couple of months brewing. She had also come up with an intense method to hide Harry's scar after every grammar or illusion Harry had tried had failed. Makeup. Something Hermione called concealer covered up Harry's scar so that the conductor of the night bus hadn't recognized him. They secured their packs and walked the rest of the way into the village. The weather still held a little chill, but the coming summer was already being felt. Add to that the fact that they were away from the chills of northern Scotland and the three of them enjoyed the walk through the countryside. The Hanged Man pub was, as the case often was in small villages, in the centre of the village, a short stroll from the church. The inside was the very model of a classic English pub. The ceiling was black, the walls were whitewashed stone, and the bar was highly polished oak. Even though it was only a little after midday, the pub was half full of people, most of them with a meal in front of them, as well as a pint of something or a glass of wine. Everyone in the pub looked up at them when they came in, and there were a few moments of surprised silence at them, not recognizing the people who walked in before everyone returned to their conversations. Hermione and Luna grabbed themselves a table, and Harry went to the bar. "What can I get you?" The bartender asked with a cheery smile. "3 pints of lager shandy, please, and what's on the lunch menu?" Harry ordered their drinks. He had no problem buying alcohol. For one, he looked more than old enough, and he actually was in his 20s, even if due to time travel he needed a potion to look 20. Some might have thought he should have been more reluctant to buy a drink for Luna, but it was only a shandy, and he thought Luna was mature enough to handle it. "We have a selection of sandwiches, a leek and potato soup, or baked potatoes and toppings." The man supplied as he started pulling a half-pint of lager into each of 3-pint glasses. Harry stepped away for a moment to consult with Hermione and Luna before returning to give the man their orders. He paid, and the man handed him the 3 glasses as he topped each of them off with lemonade. Harry took the drinks and made his way over to the table the girls had claimed, setting the drinks in front of them before he took his seat. "So, what do we do now?" Luna asked. "Well, we need to ask around about a place we can put up the tent without bothering anyone. Last thing we need is for whoever owns the land to get annoyed at unattended campers and to come and try to take down the tent," Hermione told them. About 10 minutes later, they were called to the bar to collect their food, and Luna went up to get it. "Here you go, 1 leek and potato soup, 1 toasted ham and cheese, and 1 chicken salad. Anything else I can do for you, love?" the barman asked Luna. Luna smiled at him. "Oh, maybe. Do you know who we need to talk to about pitching a tent around here for a few weeks? My name is Luna, by the way." "Sean. Well, if you're looking to pitch a tent, then you'll do better down by the river. It's common land there, and you won't be disturbing anyone. What are you going to be doing while you are here, if I may ask?" "We are mostly going to be walking around the countryside. My 2 friends spend too much time in the city and need to get out every once in a while," Luna said, coming up with the city part on the fly, before thanking the bartender and returning to her seat. They looked around the village center and did a little grocery shopping in the local shops. Shopping for food was probably going to become a daily chore, actually, as they had to act as though they had no way to preserve food. That had benefits, though, according to Hermione. Apparently spending money in business was a good way to get locals to warm up to you. 3 of them set up the tent near the river just as the bartender had suggested to Luna, and then relaxed until the early evening when they went back to the Hanged Man to ask a few of the locals about the sights around the village that they might want to see. Over a few pints and a few games of pool with the locals, Harry had 2 lists of spots for them to look into. One list was purely scenery, and in truth only held Harry's attention in that they needed it to keep up appearances with the locals. That list included things like a small waterfall that was upstream, interesting, but useless. The second list was far more relevant, including things like the old big house over the way that was obviously the Riddle Manor, and the old graveyard on the edge of the village that Harry was sure was the one that haunted his dreams on occasion. Unfortunately, no one had said a thing about anything that could be the Gaunt home. It looked like they were going to have to find it the old-fashioned way, go around and look. Once it got late, the 3 aged-up children went back to their tent, and Harry was nominated by committee to cook. He had done a simple chicken and rice, throwing in some curry powder that made it less bland and boring. After that, the 3 of them turned in, Luna and Hermione taking the larger of the 2 rooms that had a double bed and leaving Harry with the single bed in the second bedroom. 3 days passed after the trio arrived in the village of Little Hangleton, and they still hadn't found the Gaunt shack. Exploring the roads around the village had turned out to be harder than expected. The walks were easy enough, even pleasant. The problem was the number of them. There were a lot of roads that were just to provide access to the farms and fields that surrounded the village. However, they couldn't discount that the Gaunt house was off one of the side roads. In fact, from what Harry could recall from when he had seen the place in the school pensive, the only roads that could be dismissed were the two main roads in and out of the village that joined up with the bypass that took people to the relatively close town of Hengulton. They were currently walking down a road that led back to the village when Harry suddenly stopped dead, surprising Hermione and Luna until they looked at where he was staring. It looked different than it did in Harry's memories, but he would never have forgotten this place. He quickly walked to the gate and opened it, the iron hinges screaming as rust grated against rust. Harry strode forward down the path, not hearing Hermione and Luna as they tried to speak to him. He came to a stop and looked at the stonework in front of him. The angel looked calm and inviting in the Easter sunshine, but in Harry's head it was dark, and the statue in front of him that was supposed to comfort the people who had lost someone was instead restraining him, holding him so that he couldn't run away. Harry felt a hand on his shoulder and knew it was Hermione without even looking. This is where I was standing when it happened. Wormtail stunned me after Voldemort had killed Cedric. I woke up, and this statue was restraining me. I didn't have my wand. I couldn't run or fight. I was at their mercy, completely helpless. There was a cauldron right over there. Harry pointed to a spot about 7 meters from the grave statue. Bone of the father, taken from this very grave. Wormtail used a spell to crush it and added it to the cauldron. Flesh of a servant, Wormtail cut off his own hand and added that. Last ingredient was me, my blood. Wormtail came over and didn't even hesitate to plunge the knife in my arm so he could collect the blood. Then Voldemort rose up from the cauldron and called his followers. They stood right there watching and jeering as he tried to kill me. He tried all 3 of the unforgivables on me. He missed with the killing curse, and I threw off the Imperius, but the Cruciatus hit. He was like a cat toying with a mouse. I was terrified I was going to die, but I was able to get away enough that I could dive behind that gravestone. He hadn't noticed that tears were streaming down his face, and he was being hugged by the 2 girls as he pointed to a gravestone that had the name Bryce on it. Right there, when I cowering away from Voldemort, was when I realized I was going to die. I accepted it. I almost embraced it. It made things easier to cope with. There was an end I didn't need to fight for much longer. I remember thinking about my parents, and I decided if I was going to die, I wasn't going to go out hiding behind a gravestone. I was going to die like my parents, wand in my hand and fighting. While Harry continued to unburden himself, Hermione and Luna couldn't do anything except be there for him and listen. When he was finished, the 2 girls guided him back to the tent for the evening. Harry was surprised when he woke up in an unfamiliar bed the next morning. The bedroom in the tent might not be anything fancy, but it was comfortable enough, and he had quickly gotten used to its light blue walls and mismatched furniture. The room he had woken up in was dark, but he could see it had cream walls, and while it looked familiar, he couldn't think of where he had seen it before through the befuddlement that sleep had left in his head. Harry tried to get up, only to be instantly pulled back into the bed. It was then he realized that there was someone in the bed with him, and they were laying half on top of him. Harry looked down and relaxed a little. He didn't need his glasses to recognize the mass of brown curly hair as Hermione. She circled her arms around him more, trapping him from going anywhere. If it was any other girl, he would be terrified at waking up with them and not knowing why. But with Hermione, Harry had faith that, whatever happened last night, their friendship wouldn't be hurt by it. He tried to recall what had happened the night before, but everything was still a blur. He could remember the graveyard and telling Hermione and Luna about his first visit. Then the girls had dragged him back to the tent. After that, he couldn't remember anything specific. After about 10 minutes, Hermione started to wake up. She turned and looked at him, confused, and asked, "Harry, what's going on?" "I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." "Last thing I remember clearly is getting back to the tent after we found the graveyard yesterday," Harry told her honestly. At first, Hermione looked like she couldn't remember either, but after a few seconds she shook off the sleep. "Well, you practically shut down last night. After seeing the graveyard brought back that night for you, you started unloading things that you had been bottling up for years. Once you were done, you just sort of sat there barely doing anything." I didn't want to risk leaving you alone, so Luna helped put you in here with me, and then she took the other room," she explained to Harry. He was embarrassed that he had unloaded his problems on Hermione and Luna. His problems were for him to deal with. Those two had problems of their own without him dumping more on them. "I'm sorry, Hermione. I shouldn't have dumped all that on you and Luna. You deserve better from me." "Oh, shut up, Harry," Hermione said as she hugged him again. "You needed to let all that out. You should have done it sooner. Keeping stuff like that bottled up isn't good for you. You have your own stuff to deal with. You don't need me to put more on you. I should deal with my own problems." Harry tried to apologize. "Harry James Potter, you can cut out that self-destructive macho crap right now. Everyone needs help. Everyone. And the people who love you want to help, just like you want to help other people. And to be frank here, Harry, your problems aren't the type you can deal with alone. You've been through more than some war veterans. If it wouldn't break the statute of secrecy or get you labeled as delusional, I would suggest a therapist." "I don't need a shrink, I'm not crazy," Harry said with force. "Harry, I don't think you're crazy. And don't confuse a therapist with a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are the ones who help crazy people. Therapists talk to people to help them cope with stuff. Now get some more sleep, and we can talk tomorrow, yeah." Hermione returned to using his chest as a pillow and quickly fell back to sleep. Harry took longer to get back to sleep. He had things bouncing around his head, but eventually he drifted off as well. His last thought was about just how comfortable it was to have Hermione sleeping on him like she was. It took them another 3 days to find the gaunt shack, and it was actually Luna who spotted it after Harry and Hermione had already walked past it. "Harry, Hermione, I think this is it." "What do you mean, Luna? There is nothing there," Hermione said, sounding confused. "There is a magical aura here," Luna explained as if it was the most obvious thing. Harry remembered Luna finding him when he was under the invisibility cloak just before the start of 6th year in the old timeline and decided to trust her. He vaulted over the low stone wall that bordered the road, and instead of finding himself in a woodland like he had seen, he found himself in a clearing surrounded by the woods on all sides except the road behind him. At the far side of the clearing was the old rundown shack Harry remembered from his trips into the Pensive. Behind him, Hermione was going nuts. "Harry, Harry, where are you?" Harry stuck his head back over the wall, hoping that would be enough. Judging by the way Hermione jumped when she saw him, it was. "I'm right here, Hermione," Harry said, but was surprised when she ran up, grabbed his head, and ran her hands down his back before sighing in relief. "Hermione, what are you doing?" "Well, you suddenly disappeared, and then you're suddenly back as a floating head. Sorry for freaking out a little." Her tone saying that she was annoyed rather than sorry. "It must be some kind of ward, an illusion combined with a notice-me-not charm," Luna said as she stuck her hand over the wall and watched as her hand disappeared. Hermione, whose brain was starting to catch up from her little shock, realized, "Oh, it's similar to how Hogwarts is protected to keep muggles out. But it's probably not keyed specifically to keep out muggles. It's done to keep everyone out." Harry nodded. "That makes sense. Tom wouldn't want anyone in here poking around. He would want to keep everyone from here. And he would probably want to kill anyone who did go in, so be careful," Luna said lightly, as if she was commenting on the weather. "Right, we are here on a fact-finding mission, not to try and get the ring," Hermione reminded them. The two girls climbed over the wall to join him and looked around. Hermione took out a pencil and a sketch pad and began making a plan of the place. Once she was done, she switched to a red pencil and asked, "Okay, do either of you see any obvious traps?" "Well, that looks like a patch of devil's snare at the tree line." Harry pointed to where the trees would provide a patch of constant shade. "I don't know if it's meant to be a trap or if the gaunts just had some growing there, but it's definitely a hazard. The house is practically glowing. There is so much magic there. There is also some type of ward on the path. I don't recommend walking on it," Luna said. Harry sniggered, causing the other two to look at him. "Tom's not thinking again. He blocks the place from view but still assumes that anyone who gets in is going to enter by the gate and walk down the path." Luna nodded. "But because it was hidden, we jumped over a random bit of wall, and there is nothing here." While Harry and Luna talked, Hermione was shading different parts of her map red, including a few spots that the two of them hadn't noticed. Once they were done with that, Hermione surprised them by asking Harry if he was setting this up where he would add traps. It was the same thinking that Luna had pointed out to them before that led to them finding the diadem, and Hermione wasn't going to miss that again in the future. Harry pointed out a few places he would put traps, and Hermione marked those off in orange. They stayed there for most of the day, mapping out what they needed before returning to the tent. They spent their last days in Little Hangleton, mostly enjoying the break, doing a little homework, and maintaining their cover with the locals. Easter Sunday Hedwig had turned up with a basket of chocolate eggs from Sirius that Harry shared with the two girls. The trip back to Hogwarts was easy enough. They caught the night bus at 6 a.m. and had it drop them near King's Cross Station. They had arrived early, but they did have to wait for the last dose of aging potion to wear off before going to the train. Despite waiting, they were still some of the first students on the train going back to Hogwarts. They were worried when they got back that they would get called to Professor McGonagall's office for seeking off like they did. But apparently they had gotten away with it because no such summons came, and none of them had a letter from home demanding to know where they had gone. Now, they just needed to work out how they were going to get to the Horcrux. Now they knew where it was. Well, that, and find the last missing Horcrux. Then it was just the snake and Voldemort, and finally all this would be over, and this trip back in time would be worth it. Chapter 9. Chapter text, Chapter 9. Harry awoke in his four-poster bed, his pillow cuddled into his chest with his arms around it like it was a person, and he sighed in frustration. Ever since he had woken up in Hermione's arms after his little breakdown in the graveyard, he had been dreaming of Hermione lying next to him as he slept. He loved Hermione. She was one of his best friends, but his damn teenager hormones had latched on to Hermione, interpreting Hermione cuddling up next to him to keep the nightmares away as far more than it was. He reached down to the floor next to his bed and pulled on the socks he had left there the night before. Then, once his feet had a barrier to the cold stone floor, Harry pulled himself out of bed and went to his trunk of a set of school robes for the day. Once dressed, he walked down the spiral stairs to the common room. Stepping into the common room, he saw Hermione and froze for a second before sighing and joining her at one of the study tables as she went over her notes for Transfiguration. The two of them were having a little bit of a fight over the last week. After their trip to Little Hangleton, they agreed they needed the help of an adult to deal with the ring. What they were fighting over was who. Hermione was of the opinion that they should avoid Dumbledore and speak with Sirius, as the man would probably know who to contact. But Harry wanted to keep Sirius as far away from this as possible. Even now that 4 years had passed by his point of view and he had his godfather back, Harry still occasionally had a night terror watching as Sirius fell through the stone arch. He was of the opinion that Dumbledore was probably their best shot at destroying the Horcrux. They were also fighting about the Triwizard Tournament and whether they should take steps to keep Harry's name out of it. The problem with this disagreement was that neither of them could really decide on which side of the argument they fell. On one hand, if they let the tournament go ahead, then Harry would be kidnapped and used to restore Tom to a body. That did, however, have the benefit of putting Voldemort in a known time and location, and even if they couldn't kill him permanently, they could possibly make him a wraith again and buy themselves some time to find the missing Horcrux. Of course, letting the tournament play out would mean keeping Mad-Eye locked away in a trunk for a year, and neither of them were happy about that idea. It didn't help that, when they got back to the castle, they went straight into exam stress. While they were already well versed in the subjects, except for Harry's ancient runes class, the teachers weren't aware of just how prepared Harry and Hermione were, and they were piling on the homework to prepare them for the tests. The two of them were both just glad that this fight was not reaching the same intensity that some of their past fights had gotten. Neither of them were going behind the other's back, and both understood where the other was coming from, but in some ways the silent treatment was easier than the bickering whenever they couldn't be overheard. "Morning, Harry. Sleep well?" Hermione asked, only looking up from her notes for a moment to look at him. "I slept fine. You?" Harry flipped the question on her. "Well enough. Did you finish the essay for Professor McGonagall yet?" Harry gave an affirmative answer, and the two continued their small talk for a few minutes before Hermione pushed the Transfiguration notes she had already read at him to read. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, After another week, Hermione did come around to Harry's side of the argument. The fact that Dumbledore already knew what a Horcrux was and had an idea of how dangerous they were helped a lot in convincing her. However, even if she was convinced to go to Dumbledore, she still didn't trust the man. How could she when she looked back on their original timeline? Quirrell, the chamber, Sirius's lack of a trial, the tournament being held at all, sending a petty thief to watch Harry, keeping her away from Harry when Harry had watched a friend murdered, and the first thing he did to Harry in this timeline was try to invade his mind. No, Hermione was most definitely not in Camp Dumbledore anymore. If they were going to try the headmaster, then they were going to take precautions. For one, Hermione started brewing a potion she had found that would restore the memories of the drinker if their minds were altered in any way. The potion had a lot of drawbacks to make it practical. For instance, you needed to brew the potion before your mind was tampered with. A part of the brewing process was whoever memories were to be restored needed to stir the potion for an hour with their bare hand, and the potion would only stay fresh for 6 weeks once it was bottled. However, Hermione's plan was otherwise simple. She was going to brew enough for her and Harry, with Harry stirring his own of course, and then she was going to give the vials to Luna. Once they were finished with the headmaster, Luna was going to make them take the potion, by force if necessary. It took the potion 2 weeks to brew, and during that time they all had to sit their end-of-year tests. The internal tests were earlier than the OWL and NEWT exams, in order to give those students a little longer to revise for the exams that shaped their future careers. Most of the exams were easy, and the 2 time-displaced teenagers got through them with no problems. Hermione did have to make liberal use of her time turner so that she could both be in her tests, and in the potions lab they had set up in the room of requirement. Harry had 2 exams that he didn't breeze through. The first was expected, as this was his first time studying ancient runes. He didn't have his memories of learning it to fall back on, so he actually had to study this subject for more than just camouflage. The other surprise was divination. Harry had expected to give the teacher a made-up story about him facing trials over the next year. It really was easy to give predictions when you knew the future and be on his way. After all, there was no Wormtail running around to be prophesied about. But as Harry sat in the hot room with heavily perfumed smoke swelling through the air, the woman fell into a trance and started to speak. It will happen tonight. The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned by his followers. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever he was. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will set out to rejoin his master. It was exactly the same prophecy that Harry had been told last time. Did that mean that Wormtail was gone to break out of Azkaban tonight? Sirius had done it in the previous timeline, so it wasn't impossible. His professor came back around, and Harry made an excuse that she had succumbed to the heat, and dozed off for a minute before rushing out of the tower and running to the room of requirement, where Hermione was currently splitting her time between studying for her arithmancy test and the potion. Hermione, something just happened. Harry half shouted. Hermione jumped, startled at Harry bursting through the door and shouting at her, but she quickly turned serious as his words registered in her mind. What happened? Trelawney just gave a prophecy, the exact same one she gave me last time. Well, yes, wait, the one about Pettigrew rejoining Voldemort, but he's locked up in Azkaban. If Peter can't help Voldemort, how can Voldemort come back next year? Well, the best I can figure is either Pettigrew is going to escape Azkaban tonight, or someone else is going to and go to him. But Hermione, how is this happening today? How is it the exact same prophecy? That caused Hermione's mind to stall. Given how much they had changed in this time, the chances of an unplanned event happening on the same day with the same result were incalculable. Hermione started trying to logic it out. Maybe some events need to happen, fixed points in the timeline. Maybe outside of those points, we are free to change what we like. But whatever we do tonight, someone has to set out to find and restore Voldemort. But if that's the case, does any of what we are doing matter? It's all going to work out the same in the end. No, Harry, just because certain things need to happen doesn't mean we can't change the story. Look at all the changes we made so far. Sirius is a free man. We have destroyed two parts of Voldemort's soul that were still whole this year in the previous timeline, and we know where one more is and where one more will be. No one was petrified by the basilisk. Buckbeak was never put on trial. This history is already better. So Voldemort needs to come back. We already knew that, but this time is going to be much shorter, and he will do a lot less damage. And don't forget that the prophecy about you may be why we could come back in the first place. Dying by his snake probability didn't count as dying by his hand. And the knowledge that this little time travel event has given us might just be the power in the prophecy, the one Voldemort knows not. Hermione's words were what Harry needed to hear. It was difficult to see your accomplishments as worthless when you had Hermione telling you all the good they had done. But what if someone gets hurt while Pettigrew escapes? It will be our fault. We're the ones who put him there. No, Harry, if Pettigrew hurts someone, it's no one's fault but his. And the people who guard Azkaban are trained professionals who knew the risks when they signed up to join the DMLE. Hermione told Harry. He wasn't completely convinced, but there was nothing that could be done. If Hermione was right about fixed points in time, all telling anyone about the prophecy would do is make it more likely that someone would get hurt. In the meantime, he had to spend an hour with his hand in a cauldron full of potion, so he got ready to do that. The next day the prophet had big headlines declaring that Peter Pettigrew and Bellatrix Lestrange had escaped from Azkaban. The story said that the escaped convicts had left one Azkaban guard in critical care at St. Mungo's, but there were no fatalities. Harry shuddered at the idea that Bellatrix was out, but was distracted when Neville let out a raw scream of anger and stormed out of the room. Many of the students looked at Neville, surprised that Neville had such anger in him at all. Harry wasn't surprised at all, however, and neither was Hermione. They both knew what Lestrange had done to his parents. The two went after him to offer what support they could. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. 2 days later, Harry and Hermione found themselves on the spiral escalator that led to the office of Professor Dumbledore. They hesitated for a second outside the large, ornate door before Harry knocked on the door. "Come in." The headmaster's voice called from within, and the two teens opened the door and stepped in. The office was just how Harry remembered it, full of bookshelves overflowing with books and trinkets. The sorting hat sat on a shelf near the headmaster's desk, and Fawkes sat on his perch. "Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, this is an unexpected surprise. Please sit down. What can I do for you?" Even if they weren't sure of the headmaster, there was something about his grandfatherly persona that made you want to smile and trust him. The two took two of the three chairs in front of the headmaster's desk, and it was Hermione who spoke first. "Professor, do you know what a Horcrux is?" The man jumped to his feet, and the change in Dumbledore's demeanor couldn't have been faster. Gone was the kindly old man, replaced with someone you would expect to see on a battlefield facing off against a dark lord. It was suddenly very easy to believe that this was the man who defeated Grindelwald in a duel and was the only one Voldemort was ever afraid of. "I will not tell you about Horcruxes. They are dark magic, the darkest of magic, and you would do well to forget any references that you may have found and not go looking for more information." Hermione shrunk under the man's glare, but didn't back down. Harry jumped in and took the headmaster's attention onto himself. "You misunderstand us, Professor. We're not looking for information on Horcruxes. We already know what they are and agree that such a thing should never have been invented. What we needed to know was if you knew what they are before continuing with what we need to talk about," Harry said calmly. Dumbledore took his seat again, but the intense look didn't leave his face as he scrutinized them. "The two of you can consider me suitably informed. Now tell me what this is all about, or detentions and expulsion will be the least of your worries. What would you say if I told you that we know not only what they are and how they are made, but we also know of someone who made some?" Hermione asked, her nerves quickly recovering. "Who? And you say they made more than one. How many?" Old man was now gripping the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "Tom Marvolo, Riddle, and as far as we know, 6, so as to create a 7-part soul." Dumbledore's eyes went wide, and suddenly Harry felt the man invading his mind. Harry held him off but knew he could only hold for a few seconds, so he grabbed his wand and quickly cast a Protego. Suddenly he was in Dumbledore's mind, but instead of the man's memories, Harry slammed into a stone wall and was rebuffed out of Dumbledore's mind. "Stay out of my mind, sir. Harry said with force. I demand to know where you learned this. No, I will tell you everything you need to know, but where that information comes from needs to remain secret. Harry was firm. He tried to get Dumbledore to back off, but doubted it would work. It didn't seem to matter, as Harry felt Dumbledore dive into his mind for a second time. This time, instead of trying to keep the headmaster out, Harry dumped the old man in a memory of his choice. Harry watched from under the invisibility cloak as Malfoy tried to work up to killing Dumbledore under the light of the Dark Mark. Harry could feel Dumbledore watching the scene in Harry's head. Then Snape came rushing up the stairs of the tower. Severus, please. Harry watched Dumbledore pleading and could feel the living Dumbledore start to feel smug until Snape raised his wand and blasted Dumbledore off the tower. The man retreated in horror from Harry's mind, all sense of power gone. He went to a cabinet behind his desk and opened it. The two teens saw it was a liquor cabinet when Dumbledore pulled out a crystal decanter and pounded himself a measure of some amber liquid before throwing it back and doing it in one gulp. What memory did you show him? Hermione asked, a cold edge to her voice. It was her idea for Harry to show the man specific memories if he kept trying to get into his head. The tower. Harry replied just as coldly. You let him off easy. Where did that memory come from? It's too clear for it to be faked. My past, your possible future. Harry deliberately left it vague, but not vague enough as Dumbledore put the pieces together almost instantly. Messing with time is dangerous, and you can't change anything without destroying yourself. You know this, Miss Granger. It is what you agreed to when you were loaned the Time Turner. Now I find you have been abusing it. Hermione signed. I didn't use the Time Turner for this. I'm not even sure that would work, and if it did there would definitely be side effects. This is something that happened long after I returned the Time Turner and took us back to long before I received it, and we have changed a lot. I have a theory on that, but that's not what we need to discuss. Hermione refused to let the man know how they had traveled in time. He was the type to think he could do everything better and take Harry back, then obliviate him so that Dumbledore could take over. And she had already seen where the man's plans led, to Muggleborns being sent to concentration camps. What could be more important than finding someone who knows so much about Tom Riddle that they can give out information that I assume the man kept in the strictest of confidence? I assume you know who Tom is. The man sounded incredulous as he spoke. Tom Marvolo Riddle is an anagram of I am Lord Voldemort. Yes, we know, and what is more important right now is the destruction of his fourth Horcrux. Harry sounded as though he was getting annoyed with this conversation. That stunned the old man. By fourth Horcrux, do you mean the fourth one he created or the fourth one you found? Found. Harry deadpanned. Where are the first three? They need to be destroyed as well. Dumbledore was making demands again. Already done, Harry answered. My boy, Horcruxes are almost impossible to destroy. How did you do it? You positive they are destroyed? Dumbledore said in what Hermione thought was a rather condescending tone. We used basilisk fangs. Hermione said, trying to hurry things along, but every time they answered a question, the old man seemed to develop two more. Where on earth did you get basilisk fangs? Shock evident in his voice. From the basilisk living in the Chamber of Secrets. She's quite nice when you feed her. Harry answered with his signature smirk. A flash of fear passed over Dumbledore's face. And just what are you feeding her? Deer mostly, a few acromantula, basically whatever I can find in the forest that's acceptable to hunt, Harry said, and watched the headmaster relax a little. But the monster only eats people. That's what the legend says. Harry was officially annoyed now. Dumbledore was insulting a guardian of the school, and one Harry had come to be friendly with. The legends also say I grew up a pampered prince in a castle well fed and doted on. Legends can be complete dragon shit, Professor, and you're getting sidetracked again. Destroying another Horcrux, we need help. Okay, why can't you destroy this one like you did the other three? Harry was unable to keep the sound of condescension completely out of his voice. Now you're asking the right questions. The problem isn't the Horcrux itself, it's getting to it. One was hidden here in the school, another was also a weapon that was planted on a student that would have possessed her, and one was in the position of Sirius's brother when he died and was being held onto by his house elf. The next one is protected, and we can't get to it without using magic. And as we can't use magic outside of the school without activating the trace, we need someone who can. And that's where I come in. Dumbledore confirmed. getting a nod from the two of them. What about the other two? We don't have any leads on one of them yet, but the other is in his snake Nagini, so it's more about waiting until we know where she is. Dumbledore nodded. So what do you know about this Horcrux and where is it? Harry nodded. The Horcrux is in a ring. The ring is apparently a family heirloom passed down through the Gaunt family. Tom hid the ring in their old house. Hermione took a copy of their map from her ever-present book bag and slid it across the desk to the old man as she carefully avoided looking the man in the eyes. We did some reconnaissance. This is a map of the clearing that the Gaunt shack is in. We were able to find and avoid a number of traps around the house, but we couldn't get inside, so we can't tell you anything about what dangers might be inside. Harry took over again. Apart from the Horcrux itself, of course. Be careful with it, and don't go alone. Two of the Horcruxes we destroyed tried to possess us, and they all tried to influence us. Dumbledore smiled at them in what he obviously thought was a reassuring manner. I think I will be fine. After all, it's a lot harder to influence me than a couple of teenagers. Hermione scoffed and said, "Pride comes before the fall." Harry can throw off the Imperious Curse and has the protection from his mother dying to save him, protecting him from Voldemort specifically, and yet even he can be influenced by the damn things. You made the same mistake last time. It cost you and led to things you don't want to happen again. Take some backup. Harry nodded and then pulled out a box from his robe pocket that was about the size of a ring box, enlarged it with a tap of his wand, then opened the box and slid it over the table to Dumbledore. "You should also take these," he said, indicating the two basilisk fangs inside. They were lucky basilisk fangs, grew back in 3 to 6 months, depending on how well fed the basilisk was, or she might have been a lot less willing to keep donating to the cause. Luna cornered the two of them after they left the headmaster's office and offered them each a dose of potion. Hermione took hers right away as that was the plan, but Harry tried to back out, knowing that the potion would probably taste disgusting. However, the waif-like Ravenclaw simply smiled at Harry, hit him with a full body bind, and poured the potion, slowly and carefully so that he wouldn't choke, down Harry's throat once he was lying face up on the ground. "You know, Harry, if you had just taken the potion, then you could have drunk it down quickly and then gotten a drink to wash out the flavor," Luna said as she took her time pouring the disgusting liquid in his mouth, while Hermione giggled at Harry's predicament. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Dumbledore poured himself a glass of brandy once the teenagers left his office. He looked around the portraits of the former head teachers who were no longer feigning sleep and sighed. A number of them had been telling him that plans never survive first contact with the enemy, but he had plowed forward convinced he knew better. Now Potter and Granger had come in, and instead of following his carefully laid-out plan, the two of them had just gone right for Tom's weak spot. They had already destroyed 3 bloody Horcruxes, 3, and they were sending him after a 4th. And were they sending him after it because they weren't powerful enough? No, they were sending him because of the trace, because they couldn't use their wands outside of Hogwarts without alerting the Ministry and getting expelled. He looked at the map Miss Granger had given him. How had they been able to do this much without wands? It was incredible. It wasn't too hard for him to work out that they must have sneaked out during the Easter holidays, 2 weeks where the staff thought they were at home and their families thought they were at school. The big question, though, was what of Harry's scar? Did they know that it too contained a potion of Tom's soul, that Harry was just as much an anchor to Tom's life as the things they were trying to destroy? They didn't mention it as a Horcrux, but they hadn't exactly been trusting of him during the meeting. Should he tell the boy about his scar? So I didn't originally plan for Lestrange to get out of Azkaban, at least not this early. But when I thought about an actual Death Eater escaping, then it made sense that he would release at least one other follower. And when I thought about it, Lestrange, being free, should present an opportunity to bring the cup into play. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. Harry and Hermione's early summer was pretty uneventful. The two of them did their homework first, then visited each other and went on daytime trips to places like beaches, theme parks, and the cinema, enjoying their time off. They spent some of their time trying to work out where the last Horcrux was hidden, but they didn't have any leads, and neither of them had a spark of inspiration. After a few weeks, Dumbledore sent them word that he had been able to retrieve and destroy the ring. That only left the unknown Horcrux and the snake. They were so close that Harry and Hermione were starting to hope that they could actually pull this off. 4 of the 6 tethers to Tom's life, the diary, the diadem, the locket, and the ring, all stabbed with a fang taken from a 1,000-year-old basilisk. It was kind of amazing to realize what they had achieved this time around now, that they weren't fumbling around in the dark. On Harry's birthday, Sirius and the Grangers took him out like they did the year before. This time, they took him to a summer festival that was being held that week, having a lot of fun on the rides and stuffing themselves with junk food. Harry tried his hand at some of the stall games and found that he was surprisingly good at them. At one stall involving shooting small targets with a pellet gun, Harry hit the targets perfectly, and Sirius kept putting more and more money down, wanting to see how long Harry's streak without a single miss could last. It turned out the answer was 92. On Harry's 12th set of ammunition, he twitched and missed his 5th of 8 shots. The prizes for all the points Harry had won were all stuffed animals, though, and Harry wasn't particularly interested in owning one, but feeling it would be a waste to not use the points, he asked Hermione what one she would like. Hermione chose a stuffed dolphin and thanked Harry with a quick peck on his cheek. Harry was sure the only reason he avoided one of Hermione's semi-regular attempts to crush his ribs was because that honor was currently being given to her new cuddly dolphin. After the festival, they all went to a pizza restaurant. It was interesting for Harry to see what everyone put on their pizzas. Hermione and her mum opted to share a large pizza between them. Apparently they both liked the same toppings, a mix of ham, mushroom, pineapple, and prawns. Both Hermione's dad and Sirius opted for a personal pizza each, Dan going for chicken and peppers, while Sirius went for chicken, sausage, pepperoni, and bacon. Harry looked at the menu and opted for chicken, mushrooms, and garlic. While they were waiting for their pizzas to cook, Sirius handed Harry an envelope while wishing him a happy birthday. Harry, just expecting a card, was surprised that the envelope contained 3 tickets to the Quidditch World Cup. "What is it, Harry?" Hermione asked, and Harry slid one of the tickets across for her to read. They were both stunned for a moment. As they didn't have the friendship with Ron that they did previously, they hadn't thought that they would have a chance to go to the World Cup this time. It was Hermione who recovered her wits the fastest. "This is great, Harry. You love Quidditch. Imagine getting to see the World Cup. Do you know who's playing yet?" Hermione's words were enough to remind him that he would be overjoyed with this gift normally and that he had to act appropriately. "The semi-finals are this weekend," Harry said, acting as if he was still trying to get his head around the gift, then continued with building excitement. "Ireland versus Spain and Bulgaria versus Germany. The winners will play in the final the weekend after." He turned to Sirius. "Where is the game, I mean? I know England is hosting, but where is it? When do we need to leave? Who is the 3rd ticket for?" Sirius smiled. "They built a stadium on the edge of the New Forest National Park. We need to leave on Thursday and camp till the game on Saturday, and the 3rd ticket is for whoever you want to invite," he said while giving Hermione a significant look. Harry didn't need that much of a hint, but took it anyway. "Hermione, would you like to go with us to the World Cup?" Harry asked her. Hermione instantly asked her parents if she could go, and they agreed quickly enough that it was obvious that Sirius must have already explained about the tickets to them and warned them that Harry would probably want Hermione to go with him. "Oh, this is exciting. Mum and Dad used to take me camping in the Forest of Dean, and that was a lot of fun, but I haven't been camping in years," Hermione said, blatantly lying considering what they had done last Easter. "Is camping with magic any different from mundane camping?" Sirius laughed at what he saw as Hermione's insatiable need for knowledge. "Well, there is some similarity. The biggest difference is our tents. Magical tents have an expansion charm on them. They build a whole flat inside them," he explained. "So maybe camping isn't a fair description. I think I heard some people call it glamping for glamorous camping. Honestly, I wouldn't even really call it camping at all. I got a tent that was in my family vault. It has 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a formal dining room, a library, and a sitting room. The Blacks didn't like slumming it. To them, if there was even a possibility that someone outside the family would see it, then it's important to prove to them just how superior the Black family is. so I would think of it more like a hotel in a tent. Any more discussion was interrupted by the arrival of the food. The time between Harry's birthday and leaving for the Quidditch World Cup passed slowly for the two teens, not because of excitement at seeing the game, but because they knew what was coming after the match. The Death Eater riot in the first time didn't result in any casualties. However, they were already aware of how much things could change. What were the chances they would be so lucky again? Living in London had one advantage. Their portkey to the grounds left from Diagon Alley at midday, rather than a random field on a hill at stupid o'clock in the morning. Harry made sure his backpack was secure before he took a hold of the Muggle hula hoop that was the Diagon Alley portkey, along with Hermione, Sirius, and a bunch of people he had never seen before. Harry had to keep himself from laughing as he thought about his pack, as the preparations he and Sirius had done for their weekend trip had been almost exactly what he and Hermione had done at Christmas for their Easter trip. The only real difference was that, because Sirius could use preservation charms, they had also bought their fresh food. Harry felt the familiar, slightly sickening feeling of a hook grabbing him just behind his belly button as soon as a nearby clock struck midday. He was reminded why he hated portkey travel, as he was sucked through some sort of windy tunnel for a few seconds before he slammed into a grassy field halfway across the country. Embarrassingly, he was the only one who wasn't able to keep his feet. Even Hermione, despite being less graceful than everyone there but Harry, had only stumbled a little at the landing, but was able to keep herself upright. The other group split off to talk to the two wizards with clipboards who were standing there waiting, as Hermione and Sirius pulled Harry back up to his feet. Harry could hear the group talking and realized why they weren't familiar to him, and why they had just nodded at their group rather than say anything. They weren't British. Harry guessed Bulgarian, but given that Harry couldn't do more than say their language was Eastern European, it was more a guess than probable. Soon the other group moved off, a map in hand, and it was their turn. 12 o'clock from Diagon Alley under the name of Black. Sirius said to a wizard who had obviously never actually spent any time in the mundane world, judging by the cowboy boots, leopard print leggings, and camo print t-shirt that he paired with a set of purple sunglasses that looked like they had been swiped from Elton John's collection. Really, how hard was it for them to get an Empire catalogue and just look at how people dressed in it? The wizard checked his clipboard. Yep, here you are. Your campground is about a quarter of a mile's walk over there, the second field you come to. Site manager's called Mr. Payne. And he gave Sirius a map. They headed off to their campsite and found Mr. Payne. They paid for a few days and were given another map, this one showing where the amenities such as water and bathrooms were. Their plot was not the best placed, but it wasn't bad. When it came to setting up the tent, it was clear that Sirius had no more experience putting up a tent without magic than Arthur Weasley did. But the difference was that Sirius was willing to take instructions and not too overly excited to listen to them. It took them 45 minutes of Harry and Hermione working together, with Sirius just holding things where he was told, but they eventually got the tent up, and they all stepped back to admire their handiwork. Harry had to give it to the Black family. The tent actually looked Muggle from the outside. Yes, it looked like a circus tent from a Tim Burton film, but there was nothing that looked off that couldn't be explained away as a stylistic choice. Some of the other tents they had seen had brick chimneys or wooden front doors. They had passed one section that had moving posters of Victor Crumb hung over their tents. Compared to that, the Black family's tent looked almost normal. Once they were done, they were all hungry, so Harry was volunteered to cook by Hermione while she and Sirius got cleaned up. Harry didn't mind. He had learnt over Easter that Hermione was not the best in the kitchen. Harry decided to keep it simple and made some chicken, bacon, and cheese toasted sandwiches. Lunch was soon devoured, and a sulking Sirius learned that, because he was the only one of them who could use their wand, that left him to clean up. He tried to dump the chore on Harry, but Harry had to go clean himself up as he had been in the kitchen making the food, while everyone else washed off the sweat that had built up as they put up the tent in the August sun. Sirius hadn't even tried to dump the chores on Hermione. Wandering around the camp grounds was no different than last time. The three of them bumped into people they knew. Some of them they met last time, like Oliver Wood, but others, like Professor McGonagall, that they hadn't seen last time. But considering how much of a Quidditch nut the professor was, none of them were surprised when they ran into her. Sirius even ran into a few people he knew, most of whom Harry and Hermione didn't know, and one that they had to pretend not to know, Mundungus Fletcher, who Sirius knew from their time in the Order of the Phoenix. Once evening fell, wizards and witches with carts started to apparate in all around the camp, selling trinkets and food from around the world. At Hermione's suggestion, they got some type of fried chicken and noodle dish that was salty, sweet, and a little spicy, from what Harry thought was a Japanese vendor, as his outfit looked similar to something he saw in one of the Karate Kid films his cousin was watching while he was cleaning at Privet Drive. They eventually went back to their tent and turned in for the night. Friday was mostly uneventful, though Harry and Hermione did run into Lavender and the Patel twins and got introduced to Mr. and Mrs. Patel. While there was nothing much going on at the campground during the day, and the vendors only appeared in the late afternoon, the whole campground was excited for the upcoming match. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, Harry grumbled good-naturedly as he left the stadium. He had lost 5 galleons when he bet Sirius that Ireland would win, but Crumb would get the snitch. The match had been going like it had last time, but this time when Crumb did his second Ransky feint, the Irish beater was able to nail him with a bludger. After getting hit, Crumb just wasn't flying as well. The match lasted longer this time, but eventually Lynch was able to catch the snitch, just edging out over Crumb. They headed back to the tent, with Harry and Sirius animatedly going over their favorite highlights of the match, while Hermione ribbed Harry for his bet. It was past 1 a.m. when they got back to the tent. They grabbed something to eat, and after that Sirius went to bed, leaving Harry and Hermione alone, thinking that the two of them would be going to bed soon themselves. The two teens didn't even consider going to bed. As soon as Sirius left, Harry put the kettle on and pulled out a French press. Coffee would help them wait for the inevitable riot. The two of them had almost given up by the time they heard the sounds of the riot starting. Harry rushed to get Sirius up. He was groggy, and it took him a few minutes to understand, but eventually Harry's repeated utterances of "there is trouble outside" got through to the man, and he quickly started pulling on his boots. Harry went back out and joined Hermione in the tent's entryway as she was peeking out at the developing chaos. "Everything going like we expected?" Harry asked quietly, conscious of the fact that Sirius was going to join them at any moment. "Yes, they have some of the muggles who own the campgrounds and have them levitated over their heads," Hermione said, but Sirius joined them before she could say more. "Okay, what's happening?" Sirius asked, but instead of waiting for an answer, he stuck his head out to see what was happening for himself. "Fuck, son of a bitch, Death Eater attack." "Okay, I want the two of you to wait and see." He trailed off as he saw the group of masked terrorists set fire to a tent. "Okay, new plan. I want the two of you to run for the forest and make your way to the Portkey Point. I don't care where you go, but get away from here and stay together. If you get separated, contact Dan and Emma once you are safe. Do you understand?" Gone was Harry's fun-loving godfather. The man before him was a product of the First Blood War. "Where will you be?" Hermione asked, sounding nervous. "I need to go help stop them before this becomes some type of signal to them to come out of retirement." And with that, he charged off, wand in hand. The two teens had no intention of running for safety, though. Harry and Hermione had seen the atrocity that these people would commit given the chance, and neither of them were willing to let that happen again if they could help it. "Hermione, can you catch the muggles?" "Maybe with the same spell I know you practiced in case I fell off my broom," Harry asked as he pulled his invisibility cloak out of his pocket. Hermione bit her lip in nervousness, looking worried but nodded. "Yes, I think so." Harry nodded. If Hermione thought she could do it, that was good enough for him, as Hermione constantly underestimated herself. He pulled the cloak around them both, and they started moving towards the group of terrorists. "Okay, I'm going to count to 3 and cast. The muggles are going to drop right after, so you'll need to be a split second behind me to catch them," Harry told Hermione. He guided them to where they had a clear line of sight at the marked idiots, and after he confirmed with Hermione that it was a good spot for her, he started counting. 1. Harry remembered all the stories of murder he heard about these people, counting Sirius, before he went on the run, Mad-Eye, Director Bones, and Minister Scrimgeour. 2. He thought about how quickly they would return to Voldemort given the chance. 3. He decided that he wasn't going to play nicely this time and changed the spell he had planned to use. The two of them whipped their wands out, shaped their magic, and sent it towards their targets. Bombarda Maxima, Arresto Momentum. In a moment, the entire scene changed. Harry had targeted the ground beneath the feet of the Death Eaters, and it exploded into a cloud of dirt and the lower limbs of a few of the Death Eaters. The one in the middle was dead almost instantly, and the rest were flung away from the explosion. With the focus of the masked instigators now elsewhere, the Muggle family in the air started to fall. Hermione tried to catch them, but there were just too many. She caught 2 men, a woman, and 2 children, but 1 man and a little girl fell. The man, who must have been acting on pure instinct, caught the girl midair and rolled so that she would land on him, cushioning her fall. The 2 of them landed with a sickening thud and crunching sound. Red spells started flying towards the now disorganized rabble of Death Eaters as the Auras and Good Samaritans like Sirius started raining stunning spells down on them. A bunch of the Death Eaters were able to activate portkeys and escape, taking some of the fallen with them, but there were still plenty of them left lying there. It was over in only a few seconds. "Harry, we should get out of here," Hermione said in his ear. "Why, the threat is gone. You just cast a lethal curse at what is probably a group of rich, well-connected purebloods. It's best that no one knows we were involved, or you'll probably be tried for murder. Even if you aren't, the ones who got away will want revenge if they find out you fired at them. It's best we get in the woods and head for a portkey," Hermione said as she started to pull him along. Harry followed Hermione without protest as she directed them to the woods, then to the portkey point. They weren't the only ones there. A lot of the campers had come looking for a way out and were just grabbing whatever portkeys they could get their hands on. Harry and Hermione eventually were pulled in by a group of 5 teenage girls neither of them recognized, and with a hook in the navel they were off somewhere. Once they landed in what looked to be a forest, one of the girls turned to them, a hopeful, pleading expression on her face, and said, "Désolé de vous avoir attrapé, est-ce il vous plaît dites-moi que vous parlez français? Sorry about grabbing you, please tell me you speak French." Harry only recognized enough to know that the girl spoke French. Hermione, however, replied, "Oui, un peu." Yes, a little bit. The French girls all sighed in relief. Hermione was able to talk to them enough that they could explain that they grabbed the 2 of them because they had no way to know where they were going or how to find any of the magical places in Britain so that they could send a message to their families and arrange to get home. They walked for a bit and found that they weren't in a forest at all. It was a small section of a park in what looked to be a town or a city. Once they were out of the trees, they could see that the forest was only about 600 feet across. They were on a road, so Hermione tried to summon the night bus, but it never came. It was probably too busy with everyone else who had taken random portkeys and wanted to get back to somewhere they felt safe. Next to the stand of trees, there was a lake with a path going around it, so the 7 of them set off along the path, looking for any clue as to where they were or a phone they could use to call Hermione's parents. As they walked around the lake, the whole group started to have an adrenaline crash. For the French girls, they were tired, hungry, and were suffering from nerves. Hermione, who was more used to the odd adrenaline crash, powered though it like it was nothing, especially after she saw what Harry was going through. For Harry, the adrenaline crash brought with it the realization that he had killed someone. He had fought before, he had failed to save people before, but he had never killed. Now he had killed, used the magic he so loved to snuff out a life, maybe even more than one. Even if none of the others died, they would be marked for life by what he had done. As the images of the bloody stumps he had seen crossed his mind, it reminded Harry of the beef he had used to make burgers the day before. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he threw up. Hermione was suddenly by his side, whispering to him that it was okay and that he had done something that would save more people in the long term. Every Death Eater killed multiple people, so everyone dead was just less innocent victims in the future. Hermione's assurances that he had actually saved lives was little to no help, but the fact that even after he had killed someone, Hermione was still by his side, still standing with him, was a massive comfort. Harry didn't think he could keep going if Hermione abandoned him like Ron had done. After he was able to pull himself together, they continued looking for a phone and for a way to find out where they were. The French girls asked Hermione if Harry was okay, and for once Harry's fame was a bonus. Once the girls learned his name, they attributed his reaction to the fact that his parents' murderer was the leader of the terrorists that had attacked the campgrounds. They soon found a visitors center with one of those "You Are Here" maps, and they were apparently in Roath Park, Cardiff. The park was pretty close to the city center, only a mile and a half according to the map, so they set off in that direction. It was approaching 4 a.m. when they got to the city center. They were able to find an open cafe that was selling tea and coffee to a mix of the half-drunk remnants of the night before and the early risers who were going into work. They had a public phone, and Harry still had the money from Easter, as he hadn't bothered to convert it back into galleons, and he had made sure to bring both the pounds and the galleons with him to the World Cup. So Harry got all of them a coffee and gave Hermione the change so she could call her parents. Sirius was apparently already at the Grangers, and they were all sitting by the phone waiting for a call. They gave Hermione a hard time for not calling sooner, but calmed when Hermione explained that it had taken time to find a phone. They were happy to hear that they were okay, and after they told her that Sirius didn't know the destination enough to apparate to them to get them, Hermione told her parents that they would be home later in the day when the night bus was available for them. She also told Sirius the names of the French girls and asked him if he could find their two families and tell them that the girls were fine and that they would be back in London later that day.